In my first life, I died while counting meals. The flood had torn the evacuation shelter open like wet paper. 300 people were trapped on the second floor, and the stairwell had collapsed. The relief trucks were 6 hours away. I knew exactly how much drinking water remained. I knew how many injured people could be moved, and which wall would fail first. I also knew someone had to go back for the children in the storage room. The wall came down before I reached the door. When I opened my eyes again, I was kneeling in dust before 5 women I had never met. A village headman was reading out a marriage contract while the crowd laughed. My new body belonged to Rain Alder, the disgraced son of a dead nobleman. His house was being seized for debt. His land was dry clay. His new family had been given 1 sack of spoiled grain, 3 buckets of muddy water, and enough food for 7 days. The headman expected 6 useless people to starve together. A pale book appeared in my sight. Household survival probability after 7 days, 9%. I looked at the 5 women beside me and asked the only question that mattered. Who here knows how to make 9% become 10? The village of Dunridge had gathered for Rain Alder's humiliation before sunrise, when the air was cool enough for cruelty to feel comfortable. Rain stood on the cracked platform in front of the grain hall, with rope marks on his wrists and dried blood at the corner of his mouth. He was 20 years old, lean from months of hunger, with dark brown hair that fell into gray-green eyes. The body he had inherited carried the stiffness of an old beating, every breath pulled against a bruised rib. Around him, the village looked like a place being erased. Roofs had been stripped for firewood. The well rope hung over a stone shaft that had been dry for 11 months. Fields beyond the last houses were pale and empty, their furrows filled with dust. Soldiers had visited 3 days earlier and taken what little barley remained under the authority of the king's war tax. Bram Havel, the village headman, stood in the shade beneath the grain hall awning. He was a broad man with a silver chain across his chest and enough flesh on his cheeks to prove that the famine respected rank. Rain learned the situation from the words Havel read aloud and from memories that surfaced in painful fragments. Rain's father had once held a minor border title. After he opposed an illegal levy, Baron Varric Sorn stripped him of office. The Alder family kept a small freehold outside Dunridge, but debt swallowed it piece by piece. The former Rain borrowed grain through winter, then failed to repay after the army seized the spring harvest. By local custom, Havel could take the house, field, tools, and remaining flour. An older law created one narrow delay. A debtor who founded a household of 6 adults and accepted responsibility for dependents abandoned by the village received 1 year before confiscation. The law had been written after a plague, when villages needed large households to rebuild. Havel meant to turn mercy into a public execution. The 5 women were brought onto the platform one at a time. Lyra Fenn was 24. Copper hair hung in a thick braid over one shoulder, and freckles crossed a face browned by fieldwork. Her hands were broad, scarred, and stained green beneath the nails. People called her Crooked Crop Lyra, because vegetables grown under her care often twisted into unfamiliar shapes. Mira Vale was 27. She had straight black hair, cut at her jaw, clear blue eyes, and strong shoulders shaped by years of mine labor. A pale scar curved behind her right ear. The explosion that killed 12 miners had taken her hearing. Havel announced her name too loudly, as though deafness also made her stupid. Selena Marr was 29, tall and narrow, with ash-blonde hair tied at the nape and calm green eyes that studied every cough in the crowd. She wore a patched gray coat and carried an empty leather case that had once held medical instruments. 3 patients had died in her care during the previous winter. The village had decided that grief was simpler when it had a witch to blame. Kira Dane was 22. Short sandy hair framed a sleepy face, and her tawny skin showed old scratches from thornbrush. She leaned on a hunter's staff and struggled to keep her eyes open. She had been expelled from a hunting band after falling asleep during watches, though no one mentioned that her warnings had saved the same band from 2 monster trails. Evelyn Roan was 26. Her black curls had been cut unevenly after her family's creditors sold her combs and hairpins. She stood with the posture of someone who remembered silk dresses, but now wore a brown travel coat with mended cuffs. Her dark gold eyes moved from Havel's chain to the grain hall locks, then to the weight marks on the public scales. She looked at the crowd as though calculating what each person would sell for under pressure. All 5 were adults. All 5 had been told that refusal meant expulsion from Dunridge with no water ration. Rain felt the anger rise in him, but anger was a resource. Spend it badly, and nothing remained when work began. Havel asked whether Rain accepted the women into his household. The old Rain's memories offered fear. The new Rain answered with care. He asked for the contract. Laughter moved through the crowd. Havel held the parchment out, but did not surrender it. Rain read upside down. The text granted the husband legal control over the women's labor and property, as most household contracts did. It also transferred responsibility for their food, shelter, debt, and offenses. Rain pointed to a faded clause near the bottom. It allowed additional terms if all parties and 2 witnesses agreed. Havel's smile tightened. He had expected pleading, not literacy. Rain requested ink. On the back of the marriage contract, he wrote 5 names. Beside each name was a 1/6 share of all land, tools, harvest, trade goods, and future income belonging to the household. He added that household decisions concerning food, labor, safety, and debt required a majority vote. No member could be sold, dismissed, or denied rations as punishment. Personal relationships would proceed only by mutual choice. Havel objected that a husband could not weaken his own authority. Rain cited the same plague law. A founding household could define its internal charter. Evelyn's eyes sharpened. She stepped close enough to inspect the writing, then quietly corrected one phrase. Rain had written that shares applied to future property acquired by the household. She told him to include income or property acquired by any member through household labor, trade using household capital, invention, reward, or discovery. Otherwise, a clever creditor could claim that one wife's work remained separate until seized. She added 2 protections. Personal gifts and inheritances would remain with the recipient unless voluntarily contributed. An independent venture could be created later, only by unanimous written consent, after common debts, reserves, and each owner's distribution had been recorded. That prevented the household from swallowing a member's private property, while also preventing anyone from moving shared profit into a secret account. Rain amended the sentence. Lyra asked who would control seeds. He wrote that the seed reserve would be managed by the person elected for that duty. Mira watched his mouth, unable to follow the exchange. Rain turned toward her and slowed his speech. When that failed, he pointed to each woman. Then to equal marks he drew in the dust. Mira understood enough to study him with open suspicion. Selina asked whether a sick member would lose her share if she could not work. Rain wrote that illness did not cancel ownership. Kira asked whether sleep counted as work if it produced useful information. The crowd laughed again. Rain said that results would be measured, not appearances. For the first time, Kira opened her eyes fully. 2 witnesses signed. One was the village scribe, who looked frightened of Havel. The other was old Toven, a one-armed shepherd whose granddaughter Selina had kept alive through a winter fever. Havel completed the ceremony with clenched teeth. The moment the final thumbprint touched the parchment, a book appeared at the edge of Rain's vision. Its cover was plain brown leather. The Book of the Prospering House. Household members, 6. Food reserves, insufficient. Safe drinking water, 0. Average trust, 8%. Projected survival after 7 days, 9%. Primary task: feed 6 adults for 7 days using 1 sack of spoiled grain, 3 buckets of contaminated water, and 2 copper coins. Detailed map of household land. 1 use of hidden potential appraisal. Failure. Household dissolution is probable. The system offered no sword, no magical beast, and no chest of gold. Rain trusted it more for that. Havel handed him a key and ordered the new household off the platform. He allowed them the ruined alder hut beyond the southern boundary, the dead field around it, the spoiled grain, the dirty water, and 2 coins from the village poor fund. He then announced that collection of the older debt would resume in 1 year. Interest would continue to grow. Rain asked for the exact total. Havel claimed 24 silver coins and 80 copper coins, with interest continuing at 2% each month and additional collection fees. 1 silver equaled 100 copper. In an ordinary season, a field laborer earned about 2 copper and a meal for a full day. A skilled repairer earned 3 or 4. Havel's figure represented years of labor even before another month of interest. Several villagers looked away. Evelyn asked to see the debt ledger. Havel refused. That mattered more than the amount. The 6 of them walked south beneath the rising sun. Dust entered their shoes and stuck to the sweat on their faces. The hut appeared after half a mile, leaning beside a collapsed barn. Half the roof had fallen in. The chimney was split. No fence remained. The field beyond it was a hard sheet of gray-brown clay, where even thorn grass had failed. Rain stopped at the door. He told them the marriage gave him legal obligations, not ownership of their bodies or minds. Until they chose otherwise, they would treat the arrangement as a survival partnership. Everyone would eat according to need and workload. Everyone would see the stores and accounts. No skill would be used without credit. No profit would be hidden. Evelyn asked what happened when there was not enough food for equal portions. Rain answered that equal did not always mean identical. The sick might need more. A person digging all day might need more. Decisions would be recorded and explained. Selena asked who would make the final choice during an emergency. Rain said they would assign authority by field. A medical emergency belonged to her. A structural failure would belong to Mira, if Mira accepted. Food production would belong to Lyra. Scouting would belong to Kira. Trade and accounts would belong to Evelyn. Coordination and stores would belong to him. The women exchanged glances. None trusted him yet, but mistrust had shifted shape. It was no longer a wall. It had become a question. Rain unlocked the hut. Inside, they found mouse droppings, a broken table, 1 iron pot, 2 bowls, a blunt knife, a moldy blanket, and a family of lizards living in the hearth. The book updated. Projected survival after 7 days, 11%. Rain looked at the number and set the sack of grain on the table. Good, he said. We have already improved. Rain began by forbidding anyone to eat. Hunger made the order dangerous. Lyra's jaw hardened. Kira stared at the grain sack. Selena looked ready to argue on medical grounds. Rain explained that they could wait 1 hour to learn whether the food would poison them. They could not recover from wasting half the supply through panic. He divided the main room into zones. 1 corner for food, 1 for tools, 1 for dirty materials, 1 for anything Selena considered medically unsafe. The women watched him mark lines on the floor with charcoal from the hearth. The system responded to the organization. Inventory function unlocked. Spoiled mixed grain, 31 kilograms. Estimated edible portion, 46%. Contamination risk, high. Muddy water, 28 liters. Copper coins, 2. Shelter integrity, 34%. Rain asked Selena to inspect the grain. She spread a handful on the table and separated kernels by color, smell, surface texture, and weight. Some were black with rot. Others carried a pale web of fungus. A smaller portion remained dry enough to grind. Selena warned that cooking would not make all mold safe. Certain toxins remained after heat. Then she paused over the pale web. She explained that the fungus itself was not the worst kind. Given clean material and controlled moisture, it might support edible mushroom growth. The infected grain could become a starter rather than waste. The book flickered. Selena Mar. Hidden aptitude detected. Medical and biological insight. SSS rank. Current effectiveness. Restricted by poor tools, low confidence, and unsafe conditions. Rain did not tell the others about the rank. A title could become another cage. He asked Selena what she needed. Clean cloth. Boiled water. 2 separate containers. A shaded place with stable temperature. She also wanted everyone to stop touching their faces after handling mold. Rain assigned the cracked storage alcove as a fungus room, after Mira examined the ceiling and declared it unlikely to fall. Mira communicated through gestures, drawing shapes in dust with a splinter. She pointed to a gap in the roof, then to the cold clay jar they had carried from the village. She traced water running down an angled surface. Rain understood the principle. Night air cooled on a surface. Moisture condensed and could be collected. Mira's design used broken roof tiles, reed fibers, the clay jar, and a sheet of metal from the collapsed barn. It would not produce much water, but a few cups could matter. The book identified her aptitude. Mira Vale, Engineering Perception, SSS rank. She could sense vibration through her hands and feet. She noticed voids underground, stress in beams, and weakness in mechanisms. Her deafness had trained her to read movement with exceptional precision. Rain showed her a simple set of signs from his previous life. Water, food, danger, stop, good. He added marks for numbers. Mira copied them once and remembered. He also established a rule for every household meeting. One person would speak at a time while facing Mira. Every proposal, quantity, and vote would be written in short clauses on a slate or in the dust before a decision was taken. Mira read and wrote well. She did not need other people to simplify the decision, only to stop excluding her from words she could not hear. Their shared signs would expand with the work. Lyra opened the edible grain pile and searched kernel by kernel. She found barley, millet, cracked wheat, weed seed, and 6 hard black grains she did not recognize. When Rain asked why they mattered, she placed one in a spoonful of water. It swelled without breaking. She bit another and tasted it, then spat the fragment into her palm. She said the weed grew along salt roads and survived where wagon ruts held almost no moisture. Farmers destroyed it because the roots forked and the leaves cut the mouth of cattle. The seed might produce something useful if planted for selection. Lyra said ordinary breeding took seasons. Her own sense for traits allowed her to choose parents with far greater accuracy. She could not create a crop from nothing. She could shorten years into months if enough plants survived. The book revealed her aptitude. Lyra Fenn, Absolute Selection, SSS rank. Rain felt relief. Her ability was extraordinary, but it still obeyed time, soil, and biology. That meant the story of their survival would depend on work, rather than miracles. Kira had already fallen asleep against the wall. Lyra muttered that this proved why the hunters expelled her. Rain noticed Kira's fingers moving against the floor. They traced turns, pauses, and repeating arcs. After 12 minutes, she woke, picked up a charcoal stick, and drew a rough map of the land south of the hut. She marked the dry creek, a thorn belt, an animal burrow, and a shallow depression behind the collapsed barn. She said she had seen the ground from above while sleeping. The image was not a prophecy in the religious sense. Her mind combined tracks, wind, scent, slope, temperature, and remembered terrain into a model. Sleep allowed her to process more than waking thought. The book named her talent, Kira Dane, Dream Field Analysis, SSS rank. She estimated 3 earth rabbits lived near the creek. One left its burrow at dusk. A brush wolf crossed the area every second night. Tomorrow afternoon, hot wind would arrive from the west. Rain asked how certain she was. 60% on the rabbits, 80 on the wolf, 90 on the wind. He wrote the probabilities on a plank. Evelyn watched all of it from the doorway. She had not volunteered a skill. Instead, she counted nails pulled from the barn, tested the balance of the knife, weighed grain in her hands, and inspected Rain's clothes. Her attention stopped on the old silver-colored button at his collar. It carried the alderhawk, though the metal was only plated bronze. She asked permission to remove it. Rain agreed. Evelyn said the button had little metal value, but the crest made it attractive to a collector or a loyalist. Havel would offer half a copper. A traveling peddler might offer 6 if he believed it came from a full set. She expected the peddler at the North Road before noon because the village had received soldiers recently, and soldiers created demand for needles, salt, lamp oil, and cheap charms. The book opened her record. Evelyn Roan, Market Cognition, SSS rank. Rain gave her the 2 copper coins and the button. He asked what she planned to buy. She asked what the household needed most. Rain did not answer. He invited each specialist to name one item. Selena requested salt and clean cloth. Mira requested cord. Lyra requested a narrow digging tool. Kira wanted fishhooks. Rain wanted a covered container for water. Evelyn left with 2 coppers and returned 2 hours later with a small sack of salt, 6 lengths of cord, 3 fishhooks. She carried a roll of coarse linen, a chipped hand trowel, and a glazed jar with a fitted lid. She also returned with 3 coppers. The peddler had paid 8 coppers for the button, after she implied that more noble household pieces might appear later. She bought damaged goods at half price, then sold him information that the army quartermaster was seeking mule shoes in the next town. The information was true. Evelyn had heard it while villagers whispered during the wedding. Rain recorded every item and every coin in front of everyone. Evelyn checked his arithmetic. By midday, the 6 adults had been married for less than 5 hours. They had gained clean storage, a plan for water, a possible mushroom bed, a route to game. They had a seed experiment, basic supplies, and 1 copper of net cash beyond their starting money. They still had almost nothing to eat. Selena approved 11 kilograms of grain after removing contaminated kernels. Rain estimated the calories. Even stretched with mushrooms and game, it would not comfortably feed 6 adults for 7 days. He proposed a ration of thin porridge at noon, another at night, and salt water for anyone showing dizziness. Kira and Mira would receive slightly larger portions after physical work. Selena reduced her own share until Rain objected. She was the only medical worker. Weakening her endangered everyone. They voted. The ration passed 5-1. Selena voted against receiving more than the others. Rain boiled the muddy water in the iron pot, filtered it through folded linen and sand, then boiled it again. The process consumed precious wood and lost volume to steam. Mira watched the lid tremble and drew a coil shape on the table. A proper condenser could recover much of that vapor. After eating, they worked on the shelter. Mira identified the roof beams that could still bear weight. Rain and Lyra lifted tiles, while Kira tied safety lines. Evelyn sorted nails by straightness and negotiated labor terms with 2 hungry children who had followed them from the village. Rain paid each child a cup of porridge, but only after Selena checked that their parents agreed. In return, they gathered reeds and dry dung for fuel. Selena scrubbed the pot, bowls, and work surfaces with ash and boiled water. She established a hand-washing station using a pierced gourd tied to the wall. It released a small stream when tipped. The amount looked insulting until Rain calculated that it used 1/5 the water of dipping hands into a basin. Lyra prepared 3 planting beds near the hut. She did not waste seed in the dead field. She mixed clay with dung, crushed bone from an old refuse pit, fireplace ash, and the least contaminated grain husks. The smell drove everyone outside. When she woke, she adjusted the rabbit estimate. 1 adult and 2 young. The adult would emerge near a flat stone when the sun touched the thorn ridge. Rain went with her. He carried the dull knife and a loop snare. Kira moved slowly, testing dust with her toes, reading marks Rain barely saw. She pointed out brush wolf scat and turned them away from the direct path. They approached the burrow from downwind. The rabbit emerged 10 minutes later. Rain threw the loop too early. The animal kicked free and vanished into brush. Kira did not criticize him. She examined the bent cord, then showed him the correct angle. They reset the snare and waited another hour. One of the young rabbits appeared. This time, Kira triggered the loop by hand when the animal crossed the stone. The rabbit was small. Killing it felt like taking from tomorrow. Kira said the burrow could support 2 animals at most during the drought. If all 3 remained, the weakest would die and attract the wolf. Taking 1 young rabbit improved the survival chance of the others. Rain accepted her judgment. Back at the hut, Selena inspected the meat and organs. She found no visible disease. They cooked the rabbit with grain, salt, and edible leaves Lyra gathered near the creek bed. The meal did not fill their stomachs. It did something more useful. It proved the household could convert knowledge into another day. The book updated before sleep. Safe drinking water, 12 liters. Food reserve, 6.8 adult days. Shelter integrity, 51%. Average trust, 14%. Projected survival after 7 days, 37%. Rain lay beneath the repaired section of roof, while the women arranged themselves across the floor with blankets between them. The formal marriage contract was tucked inside the glazed jar to protect it from damp and theft. Outside, the first drops from Mira's condenser tapped into a clay cup. The household survived the first week through discipline rather than abundance. Mira's condenser gathered less than a liter on the first night. She rebuilt it the next day, with a wider metal sheet and a steeper angle. By the fourth night, it produced nearly 3 liters. The water tasted of iron and roof dust, so Selena required boiling, but each cup reduced the amount taken from their muddy supply. The mushroom bed began as a row of clay jars filled with boiled straw, cracked grain, and carefully selected fungus. Selena watched them with the intensity of a physician beside a dangerous patient. 2 jars developed green contamination and were buried far from the hut. 4 produced white threads that smelled clean and earthy. Lyra planted the salt road weed, millet, and several odd barley grains in separate mounds. She rationed water by drops. Every seed received a mark in her notebook. She recorded which swelled, which split, and which sent roots deepest before exposing leaves. Kira's map guided them to thorn fruit, beetle larvae, 2 more rabbits, and a shallow pocket of damp soil beneath the old creek bank. She also warned them away from a hollow where a brush wolf had begun sweeping during the day. On the second morning, Mira turned the damp pocket into a temporary seep. She dug a narrow infiltration trench uphill from it, lined the intake with washed gravel, charcoal, and folded cloth, then covered the opening against dust and animals. The trench yielded between 16 and 18 liters each day for the remaining 6 days before the flow began to weaken. Selena boiled every batch. Rain moved heavy work to dawn and evening. He set a minimum of 2.5 liters of safe liquid per adult each day, with additional broth and water for anyone digging or hunting. The seep, rather than the small roof condenser, carried the household through the first week. It was not large or reliable enough to support fields, which made Mira's deeper test bore necessary. Evelyn sold 1 fishhook to a widow for a worn copper coin and a bundle of onions. She did not accept the widow's cooking pot, though it was worth more, because the woman needed it to boil water. Instead, Evelyn arranged for the widow's older sons to work 2 mornings repairing the barn in exchange for future meals. Rain tracked every gain and loss. He calculated that 1 rabbit hunt cost 2 people 3 hours, a length of cord, water for the walk, and enough energy to require larger rations. The meat produced fewer calories than the hunters spent if they searched blindly. Kira's guidance made the difference between profit and hunger. The book displayed labor cost once Rain began recording it accurately. Hunting without field analysis. Negative expected return. Hunting with Kira's route. Positive expected return at current game density. Roof repair using new timber. Impossible. Roof repair using recovered beams. 12 labor hours. Injury risk, 17%. The system did not solve problems. It made self-deception harder. On the 6th morning, Mira woke Rain by pressing his palm against the hut floor. At first, he felt nothing. Then a faint tremor passed through the clay in a slow rhythm. Mira had been walking the property barefoot before dawn. Beneath the depression behind the barn, she sensed a cool layer and a hollow response several body lengths down. It might be buried stone. It might be an old cistern. It might be water moving through gravel. They could not dig blindly. A shaft collapse would kill them. Mira drew a design for a narrow test bore. She needed a straight pole, an iron point, a crossbar, and a way to lift loose soil. The collapsed barn provided the pole. The old hearth grate provided iron. Rain heated the metal, while Mira hammered it flat with a stone, folded it around the pole, and bound it with wire pulled from a ruined fence. The tool looked crude. Its weight and balance were exact. They began boring at the edge of the depression. Rain and Lyra turned the crossbar. Kira removed loosened earth with a leather cup tied to cord. Mira kept one hand on the pole and stopped them whenever the angle shifted. Selena enforced brakes and checked for dizziness. Evelyn recorded labor, then went to Dunridge to secure more rope on credit. At 4 body lengths, the pole struck stone. At 5, wet grit clung to the iron. The 6 of them stared at it. Rain refused to celebrate yet. Damp soil did not guarantee a sustainable well. They widened the bore and lowered a cloth bundle filled with dry ash. When they pulled it back, the ash was dark with moisture. Mira estimated a deep layer of water moving through broken limestone. Reaching it required a lined shaft or a driven pipe. They lacked timber, bricks, iron pipe, and a lifting mechanism. The system reward from the 7-day task became more valuable with each obstacle. On the 7th evening, Rain served the last planned ration. The household had eaten grain, rabbit, onions, thorn fruit, beetle paste, and the first small cluster of mushrooms. No one had eaten well. No one had gone without a recorded reason. Selena checked their health. They had lost weight, but no one showed severe dehydration. Mira's hands were blistered. Lyra had a cut on one heel. Kira slept 16 hours after the final hunt. Evelyn had developed a cough from market dust. Rain's bruised rib had begun to heal. The book opened above the table. Primary task complete. All 6 household members fed for 7 days. No member denied safe water for more than 12 hours. Food distribution transparency. Acceptable. Household survival probability after 30 days. 42%. Reward granted. Detailed land map. 1 hidden potential appraisal. A map unfolded in Rain's vision. It showed the property boundaries, soil depth, buried foundations, old drainage lines, and the underground limestone layer. A blue line crossed beneath the barn depression. The aquifer was real. The map also showed a narrow stone chamber under the ruined barn, once connected to the alder manor that had burned years earlier. The chamber remained mostly intact. Rain used the appraisal on the object that could change their future most. Not the old knife, not the land deed, not the strange black seed. He chose the buried chamber. Hidden potential appraisal. Former ice cellar. Stone-lined. Stable eastern wall. Collapsed western entrance. Suitable for water storage, mushroom cultivation, cool food preservation, or emergency shelter after repair. Associated feature. Abandoned rain channel runs from northern ridge to cellar roof. Rain showed Mira the map by drawing it from memory. She studied the lines, then smiled for the first time. They did not need to invent every part of a water system. Someone in the Alder family had already built half of one. The following morning, they excavated the eastern wall of the barn and uncovered a sealed stone arch. Air moved through a crack. The smell was old earth, not rot. Mira designed supports before anyone entered. Rain traded free copper coins and a future share of dried mushrooms for 2 sound beams from Old Tovan. Evelyn wrote the agreement. Lyra and Kira cleared rubble. Selena remained outside with bandages and a rope harness. The entrance opened near noon. The cellar was larger than the hut. Stone shelves lined one wall. A cracked channel ran along the ceiling toward the northern ridge. At the lowest point stood a round cistern filled with silt. Mira climbed down and pressed both palms to the floor. She pointed toward the aquifer, then to the cistern. Her plan came together over the next 3 days. They would drive a narrow wooden pipe to the water-bearing gravel. A leather valve at the bottom would allow water to rise when a hand piston pulled upward. The pipe would discharge into the cistern, where sediment could settle. A second hand pump would lift water for use. The leather for valves came from an old harness Evelyn bought with a promise of 2 repaired grain bins. The piston seal used layers of boiled cloth and tallow. Mira carved the pump body from a straight barn beam. Rain and Lyra burned and scraped the central bore using a heated iron rod. The first attempt failed. The lower valve leaked. The pipe drew mud and air. Mira dismantled it, found a cut in the leather, and changed the valve angle. The second attempt lifted half a cup before the piston jammed. The wooden cylinder had swollen unevenly. Mira sat beside the failed pump with her hands clenched. Rain remembered the way people had mocked her at the wedding. He did not praise the design or tell her failure was useful. Empty encouragement could feel like pity. He placed the labor record beside her. The pump had already proved water existed. The two failures had identified the valve and swelling problems. Their remaining food allowed 4 days before they needed income. He asked whether a third attempt had a reasonable chance of success. Mira read his lips, then wrote in dust, 70%. Rain asked what would raise it. Dry hardwood, better grease, smaller piston. Evelyn found hardwood in the handle of Havel's broken public grain measure, discarded behind the hall after the army inspection. She bought it from the village carpenter for 1 copper and the right to use Mira's future pump for 2 hours each week. The third piston moved smoothly. Rain pulled the handle. Air coughed through the spout. Mud followed. Then a clear stream struck the bottom of the cistern. Everyone froze. Mira kept pumping. The stream strengthened. Lyra dropped to her knees and touched the water. Selena caught her wrist before she could drink. The first flow had to be discarded until the pipe cleared. They pumped for an hour, watching mud become cloud, then pale water. Selena boiled a sample and checked it for smell, sediment, and visible life. She approved a small cup. Rain offered it to Mira. Mira shook her head and pointed to 6 bowls. They shared the first safe water equally. The book updated. Reliable household water source established. Average trust, 31%. New household designation available. Subsistence camp may be upgraded to founding farm after stable food production is achieved. That night, Lyra went alone to the planting beds and poured 1 measured cup of water around the 6 black seeds. 3 had sprouted. Their roots had already reached deeper than her finger. Water changed the scale of every decision, but it did not make water free. At the first weekly household meeting, all 6 members elected Lyra to manage the seed reserve. Her authority covered breeding stock, experimental beds, and any decision that consumed seed needed for the next generation. The appointment was written beside the ownership charter. The pump demanded labor. The wooden seals wore down. Too much drawing lowered the cistern faster than the aquifer replenished it. Mira placed marks on the wall and created a schedule. Drinking and cooking came first. Medical cleaning came second. Seed beds came third. Washing clothes happened only with reused water. Construction received whatever remained. Rain supported the restrictions, even when villagers arrived with jars. The first was old Tovin. His granddaughter had fever, and the public well was dry. Rain gave him 10 liters and recorded it as emergency aid. The second was Bram Havel's cousin, who wanted 50 liters for brewing ale. Evelyn quoted a price high enough to send him away angry. By sunset, a line had formed outside the property. Rain called a household vote. They could sell water, give it away, or restrict it. Giving freely would empty the cistern and damage the pump. Refusing everyone would preserve the household, but leave neighbors drinking from stagnant ponds. Evelyn proposed water credits. Each family could receive a basic emergency amount in exchange for labor, materials, food, or future payment. The price would rise for commercial use. Selena added that households with sick children needed priority. Mira limited daily external distribution to 1/4 of safe output. They painted the rules on a board and hung it beside the gate. Havel sent a guard to tear it down. The guard stopped when old Tovin and 12 villagers stood in front of it. The household gained labor faster than it gained food. In 5 days, workers cleared the old rain channel, repaired the cellar roof, and dug shallow swales across the field. The channels followed the land contour and slowed runoff, instead of letting rare rain escape downhill. Lyra expanded the test beds. The black-seeded weed produced 6 plants. 2 had bitter leaves. 1 wilted in midday heat. Their roots grew into swollen forks beneath the soil. Lyra dug one too early and cut it open. The flesh was white, wet, and fibrous. Selena tested a piece on herself after boiling it 3 times. It caused no immediate illness, but tasted so bitter that Kira spat it across the yard. Lyra did not look discouraged. She looked furious with the plant. Her talent allowed her to perceive inheritable traits as patterns. She could sense which flower carried deeper roots, which stem wasted less water, which root stored more starch, and which seed might reduce bitterness. She still needed pollination, seed formation, germination, and growth. To shorten the cycle, she used every method she knew. She split roots to clone promising plants. She stressed some with salt, others with heat, and kept a control group in better soil. Mira built shallow frames covered with oiled cloth to trap warmth at night. Selena prepared diluted compost tea and monitored for fungus. Kira slept beside the beds during the hottest hours, then woke to predict which plants would fail before visible wilting. Rain managed water and labor, so the experiments did not consume the household. The first generation produced seed in 26 days. Lyra selected 12 seeds from 2 plants. The second generation matured in 19 days under the warm frames. The roots were smaller, but less bitter. She crossed them with a local vine whose tubers village children sometimes dug from creek banks. The work drew ridicule. People passing the farm called the swollen forks pig fingers. Havel announced that Rain was wasting water on weeds, while respectable farmers waited for rain. Rain did not answer. He had seen relief operations fail because leaders protected familiar methods after conditions changed. Drought had made respectable farming impossible. Meanwhile, Selena's mushroom bed produced enough for 2 pots of stew. She dried the best caps and powdered the stems. The remaining growth spread through new straw. Mushrooms converted material humans could not digest into food, but they needed care and clean handling. One careless jar could contaminate the cellar. Mira built a foot-operated grinder from 2 stones, a wooden axle, and a rope belt. It doubled the speed of flour production and reduced strain on injured wrists. She then used the same axle principle for the water pump, allowing 2 people to alternate with their legs. Kira mapped monster movement around Dunridge. Brush wolves had begun hunting closer to homes. Boneback boars followed the last green ravines. Earth rabbits disappeared from overused fields. The local ecosystem was collapsing toward the remaining water sources. Rain established a hunting rule. No den would be emptied. No pregnant animal would be taken if another target existed. Every hunt required Kira's route and a cost estimate. The policy angered desperate villagers, but those who ignored it returned injured or empty-handed. On the 46th day after the wedding, Selena visited Dunridge to check old Tovan's granddaughter. She returned carrying a child who weighed little more than a grain sack. The girl's name was Pella. Her hair had thinned in patches. Her gums bled. Her legs trembled when Selena tried to set her down. Several children in the western row showed the same symptoms. The village blamed witchcraft, bad air, or weakness. Selena blamed starvation. The children ate mostly boiled grain water after soldiers took the beans, onions, and dried fruit. Their bodies lacked protein, salts, and vitamins. Selena could reduce infection and bleeding, but she could not create nutrients from herbs alone. Lyra dug up 3 second-generation roots. Each root was lumpy, purple at the tip, and covered with hair-like fibers. She had planned to keep them for seed selection. Selena cut one open. The flesh had turned pale gold. She tasted a cooked slice, then used a simple reagent from crushed leaves to test acidity and mineral content. Her expression changed. The root carried starch, useful salts, and a concentration of nutrients missing from the children's diet. It was not enough by itself, but combined with mushroom broth and grain, it could reverse the decline. Lyra looked at the remaining roots. Eating them would set her breeding work back by weeks. Rain did not decide for her. The seed fund belonged under her authority. Lyra asked how many children were sick. Selena estimated 17 severe cases and perhaps 40 early cases. Lyra harvested every mature root. For 6 days, the farm kitchen ran from before dawn until after dark. Selena designed a thin stew that weak stomachs could tolerate. Grain supplied energy. Mushrooms supplied protein. Root supplied missing nutrients. Salt replaced what diarrhea and heat had taken. She created portions by age and weight. Rain organized delivery so children received food before adults could trade or steal it. Mira made lidded clay carriers. Kira planned routes that avoided the brush wolf trail. Evelyn recorded every recipient and required no payment from families below the famine line. Those with resources contributed fuel, cloth, or labor. Havel accused the household of using children to gain political loyalty. Then Pella stood without help for the first time in 2 weeks. The accusation lost force. The improved root crop was still ugly. It forked like a clenched hand and left a purple stain on the knife. Villagers laughed until Selena held a public examination in the square. She showed the difference between children who had received the stew and those who had not. She explained nutrition in plain terms, using a cart as an example. Grain was the load, salt and vitamins were the axle grease. A full cart with dry axles still broke. People listened because their children were watching. Lyra named the crop Deepwell Root. Evelyn immediately objected to selling it raw. The harvest was too small. The shape invited ridicule, and fresh roots spoiled. She proposed slicing, steaming, pounding, and drying them into flat cakes mixed with mushroom powder and salt. The cakes would travel well, hide the strange appearance, and command a higher price. Mira built a press using a screw from the ruined grain measure. Selena established safe cooking temperatures. Lyra determined which roots could be eaten and which must remain for seed. Kira tested storage locations and found the cellar's eastern shelf held the most stable humidity. Rain calculated the first production batch. 6 kilograms of root, 2 kilograms of grain, half a kilogram of mushroom powder, salt, fuel, water, and 14 labor hours produced 84 ration cakes. Rain estimated that one cake contained close to 200 calories. 3 cakes with water and broth formed a half-day ration for light work. A full day required 6 cakes and additional food. Evelyn sold 12 to a caravan guard for 4 coppers. The guard returned the next morning and bought 30 more for 10. Over the following 2 days, she sold the remaining 42 at the same caravan rate for 14. Gross revenue was 28 coppers. Replacing grain, mushroom powder, salt, fuel, and packing cost 6. 3 more paid the children and laborers who had worked the drying racks. 19 coppers remained as the household's first meaningful surplus. Havel expected Rain to spend it on meat, wine, or debt interest. Rain placed 6 coppers in the seed fund, 4 in the pump repair fund, 3 in the medical fund, 3 in emergency reserve, and 3 in a debt repayment reserve. Each allocation was approved in a household meeting and written on the wall. The book opened. Stable food product created. Household income exceeds immediate consumption cost. Fair compensation standard established. Founding farm status achieved. New function unlocked. Family synergy. When household members combine distinct aptitudes toward one agreed objective, effectiveness may exceed individual limits. Synergy requires trust, transparent credit, and shared benefit. Rain looked around the table. Lyra held the seed ledger. Mira adjusted the grinder belt. Selena cleaned the knife with boiled cloth. Kira slept with her head on folded arms, while one finger remained on the map. Evelyn counted coins twice before sliding the box to the center. The system described them as a function. Rain saw a family beginning to form. Prosperity arrived at the farm, disguised as a longer workday. Before accepting new projects, Rain closed the first deferred promises on the commitments board. The widow's sons received every meal owed for their barn work. Old Toven received his agreed share of dried mushrooms. Mira repaired both grain bins promised for the valve leather. The carpenter used the pump for his first 2 scheduled hours under the written limit. Evelyn marked each obligation complete in front of the household. The Deepwell root required planting, hand pollination, selection, steaming, pressing, drying, packing, and record keeping. The mushrooms needed clean straw and constant inspection. The pump demanded grease and new seals. Workers needed meals before they could repair fences or expand the cellar. For the first time, the household had enough opportunities to fail through success. Rain placed a new board beside the accounts. Water output, food reserve, safe labor hours, tool condition, coin reserve, commitments owed. Whenever someone proposed a new project, they had to show which limit it consumed. Lyra wanted to plant the entire southern field with second-generation deep well root. Evelyn wanted to reserve half the seed for sale after demand rose. Mira wanted timber for a larger pump. Selena wanted a proper treatment room. Kira wanted 2 weeks of food to scout the northern ravines where larger game still moved. All 5 proposals were good. Together they would have destroyed the farm. The household meeting lasted until midnight. Lyra argued that seed multiplied value better than coin. Evelyn answered that a crop growing in the ground could be burned, taxed, stolen, or ruined by one hot wind. Liquid Reserve kept choices open. Mira tapped the table and pointed at the pump seal. Without water, both seed and coin became less useful. Selena listened, then said the children of Dunridge had begun improving. But 3 adults showed signs of the same nutrient illness. Kira added that brush wolves were circling the western houses because cooking smells had increased. Rain did not seek a compromise that made everyone equally unhappy. He asked which danger could end the household fastest. The pump ranked first. A week without it would kill the crop and force them back to contaminated water. They allocated timber and leather to Mira. The second danger was a field failure. They planted only 1/3 of the southern field, kept half the seed reserve, and used the remainder in controlled test beds. The treatment room received 1 clean table, shelves, and a washable clay floor instead of a full building. Kira's expedition was shortened to 4 days. She would train 2 assistants rather than scout alone. Evelyn kept a 10 silver emergency target, though they owned less than 2 silver in total. The decision pleased no one completely. It survived the following month. Deepwell roots spread across the first field in uneven rows. The plants remained strange, but the newest roots were smoother and less bitter. Lyra marked each plant with colored cord. Children learned that red meant do not touch, blue meant harvest for food, and white meant seed stock. Mira's upgraded pump used a weighted beam and twin pistons. One person could maintain flow with less effort, while a stone settling tank separated grit before water entered the cellar cistern. She also installed a simple meter. A small wheel turned with the flow and moved beads along a wire, allowing the household to estimate volume without guessing. Selena's treatment room opened twice each week. She charged those who could pay and accepted labor from those who could not. Every patient record included symptoms, food intake, water source, treatment, and result. She hated writing the names of the 3 patients who had died the previous winter, so Rain obtained their old details from relatives and added them to the ledger. The record showed that all 3 had arrived after days of severe fever. 2 had been treated with dirty cloth because no clean linen remained. 1 had received the wrong herb after Havel's storekeeper refused Selena access to the locked medicine chest. The deaths still belonged to her care. They did not belong to her alone. Kira trained old Tovin's grandson Nal and a former poacher named Bess to read tracks. She made them walk the same path 3 times, then describe what changed. Nal noticed hoof marks. Bess noticed broken stems. Kira noticed that the hoof marks were too deep on the left. The broken stems leaned against the wind, and a bone-back boar was favoring an injured foreleg. She also taught them when not to hunt. Evelyn created 3 prices for ration cakes. A famine price for the poor covered ingredients only. A village price included wages and maintenance. A caravan price charged what travelers were willing to pay. The difference funded the lower rates. Some villagers called it unfair that outsiders paid more. Evelyn explained that equality of price would mean one of 2 things. Either the poor would pay too much, or the farm would lose the profit that kept production alive. She posted costs beside the prices, daring anyone to find hidden coin. Havel found another line of attack. He sent a notice stating that all underground water beneath Dunridge belonged to the village headman's office. The farm had 7 days to surrender its pumps and pay arrears for unauthorized extraction. Evelyn read the notice twice and smiled in a way that made Rain uneasy. She said the claim relied on a water ordinance issued after a flood 63 years earlier. The ordinance concerned public wells inside the village boundary. The Alder freehold lay outside that boundary. Rain asked how she knew. She had spent 3 afternoons buying ink for the village scribe. listening while he complained about Havel's poor filing. The scribe kept old boundary records beneath the grain hall stairs. Obtaining the records was another problem. Havel controlled access. Rain opened the glazed jar and removed his father's remaining papers. Most were receipts, debt notes, and fragments of correspondence. One folded deed bore the seal of the provincial land court. It described the Alder property, using landmarks that no longer existed, including a white oak, a stone sheepfold, and the western edge of an irrigation ditch. Kira located the buried foundation of the sheepfold. Mira found the old ditch under silt. The white oak was dead, but its roots remained near the road. Together, the markers placed the entire aquifer access point within the freehold. Havel refused the evidence. He ordered the market keeper to deny the household a stall and warned traders that goods from the farm might be confiscated. The next market day, Evelyn arrived with no goods. She brought 12 workers carrying empty baskets. Each wore a small wooden token carved with a root symbol. She walked through the market, buying salt, cloth, lamp oil, and scrap iron in tiny amounts from different sellers. Payment came partly in coin and partly in promises redeemable for ration cakes at the farm gate. Havel could close a stall. He could not stop villagers from walking to a private freehold. By noon, a second market had formed along the road outside Rain's fence. The headman sent 2 guards to disperse it. Old Tovan asked, under which law villagers could not visit a neighbor. The guards had no answer. They overturned one basket and left. That evening, someone cut the condenser sheets and poured ash into the settling tank. Mira found the damage before contaminated water reached the cistern. She sat beside the cut metal, running her thumb along the blade marks. The sabotage had been done with a narrow knife, from left to right, by someone standing close. One print near the tank showed a boot heel with 3 iron studs. Kira studied the yard and traced the intruder's route to the northern fence. The person had paused twice, unfamiliar with the property. He had avoided the dogless gate and crossed through thorn brush, suggesting he expected a guard animal that did not exist. Rain repaired the damage and doubled night watches. The system displayed a warning. External hostility rising. Probability of organized attack within 30 days. 62%. Rain called a meeting of every paid worker and water credit holder. He did not hide the warning behind vague reassurance. He told them Havel had failed to take the pump legally and might try force. Some workers left before sunset. Most stayed. They stayed because their names were in the wage ledger. They stayed because their children had eaten. They stayed because Mira had repaired their tools and Selena had treated their wounds. Loyalty had grown from transactions honored repeatedly. Rain assigned defense as another household project with costs and limits. They would not build a fortress. They lacked stone, weapons, and trained fighters. They would make the farm difficult to attack, easy to evacuate, and expensive to burn. Mira widened selected irrigation channels and covered them with reed mats dusted to match the ground. She installed release gates connected to the settling tank. Pulling one lever would flood the channels into ankle-deep mud. Kira mapped approaches and placed quiet signal lines with clay beads. Different patterns indicated the north fence, road, field, or cellar. Lyra cultivated a local dust flower whose pollen caused watering eyes and confusion when inhaled in concentration. Selena tested dosage carefully. Too much could damage lungs. She prepared sealed packets for throwing, not a drifting cloud that might harm defenders. Selena also made sleep smoke from poppy sap, bitterleaf, and damp straw. It would not drop a healthy fighter instantly. In an enclosed space, it could make coordination difficult and slow reactions. She prepared antidote tea and warned everyone about wind direction. Evelyn moved the coin box, contracts, and seed records into separate hidden containers. If attackers found one cache, they would not gain everything. She also paid 2 travelers to carry copies of Havel's water claim and the Alder deed to the district court. Rain organized people into teams. No one defended alone. Every station had an escape route. Every weapon had a purpose. The farm's goal was evidence and survival, not corpses. Lyra asked what would happen if restraint cost them the crop. Rain answered that killing villagers or hired men could give Havel the legal excuse he needed. A burned field could be replanted. A murder charge could erase the freehold. She accepted the logic and spent the night moving her best seed to the cellar. The attack came 9 days later. Kira had predicted 12. The first signal sounded after moonrise. 3 clay beads clicked once beneath Rain's window. North fence. He woke with his hand already closing around the short spear beside the bed. The household slept in shifts now. Mira was in the cellar workshop. Selena rested in the treatment room. Lyra and Evelyn shared the loft. Kira had taken the early watch from the barn roof. A second pattern followed. 2 fast clicks, pause, 1 click. More than 5 intruders. Rain stepped outside and saw no movement. The field lay silver under a thin moon. Deep well leaves stirred in the hot wind. Beyond the northern fence, thorn brush formed a black line. Kira slid down the roof ladder. She had counted at least 14 people approaching from 3 directions. One group carried oil jars. Another had bows. A third moved toward the cellar entrance. Havel had hired professionals, or men who wanted to look like professionals. Rain activated the defense plan. He rang no bell. A loud alarm would reveal positions. Instead, runners moved through the sleeping camp and tapped assigned doors. Workers led children and non-combatants through the cellar to the eastern escape trench. Old Toven took charge of the evacuation. Selena opened the medical station. Mira locked the main pump lever and released water into the hidden channels. The first attackers crossed the north fence without resistance. Kira had advised leaving that section weak. Men who entered easily became careless. 6 shapes moved between the test beds, carrying clubs, sacks, and 1 covered lantern. Rain let them advance until the leader raised his arm toward the drying shed. Mira pulled the second release cord. Reed mats collapsed beneath 3 attackers. They dropped into the irrigation channels as stored water turned clay into heavy mud. One man lost his club. Another struck his knee on the channel edge and shouted. The remaining men spread out instead of rushing to help. Their discipline confirms they were hired bandits, not angry farmers. An arrow struck the hut wall near Rain's shoulder. The bow group had taken position on the western ridge, outside the channels. Their line of sight covered the yard. Rain signaled with a shuttered lamp. Kira and Bess crawled through the root rows, using raised beds as cover. They dragged 2 broad panels Mira had built from barn planks and rawhide. The panels were too heavy for true shields, but angled against stakes, they stopped arrows from reaching the pump station. The attackers changed tactics. 2 men threw oil jars toward the drying shed. Lyra and 3 workers had soaked the shed walls earlier. 1 jar shattered on wet clay and failed to catch. The other landed on the roof, where dry reed bundles ignited. Lyra climbed the rear ladder with a blanket. An arrow cut through the blanket edge. She flattened against the roof, waited for Kira's signal, then crawled toward the flame, while the hunters loosed stones from slings at the ridge. The slings did little damage. They forced the archers to duck. Lyra smothered the fire and kicked the broken oil jar into an empty channel. At the cellar, 4 intruders found the door barred. They began striking the hinges with axes. Mira felt each impact through the floor. She pointed to a mark on her wall mat. The men stood beneath an old rain chute. Selena checked the wind, then gave permission. A worker opened a clay pipe above the chute. Damp straw smoke mixed with measured sleep herbs poured down into the narrow entrance. The attackers backed away, coughing. One covered his face and kept chopping. Rain moved with Nal and 2 former caravan guards along the eastern wall. They carried long poles with forked ends. Their goal was to pin weapons, not stab bodies. The man at the door swung his axe when Rain entered the smoke. Rain caught the handle in the fork of his pole. The impact drove him backward. His injured rib flared. The bandit twisted, trying to wrench the pole away. Rain had trained for supply work, not duels. He used the terrain. He stepped aside and let the man pull. Nal hooked the bandit's ankle from behind. The man fell into wet clay. One guard pinned his wrist while Rain kicked the axe away. A second attacker came through the smoke with a knife. He slashed Nal's arm and lunged toward Rain. Rain blocked with the pole shaft. The knife bit wood. The attacker released it, drew a smaller blade, and drove forward. Rain retreated across the marked ground until his heel touched a buried rope. He pulled. A weighted net dropped from the cellar wall. The bandit cut one strand before the caravan guards wrapped the rest around his arms. The Western archers stopped shooting. Kira appeared at Rain's side, breathing hard. She said the ridge group was moving south to reach the grain shed from behind. That path crossed the old creek bank. Rain knew the map. The creek bank offered cover, but its upper shelf was brittle after days of excavation. He sent Kira, Bess, and 4 workers to the southern release gate. He remained at the cellar because the trapped men had begun shouting warnings to others. The north field erupted in dust. Lyra had waited until the wind shifted east, away from the defenders and evacuated families. She opened 2 pollen packets beneath the attackers climbing from the channels. Fine, yellow powder spread at knee height, then rose in the hot breeze. The men coughed and rubbed their eyes. The effect was not paralysis. It ruined depth perception, filled noses with mucus, and made every light blur. One bandit swung at a worker and struck a post. Another stumbled back into the mud. Rain's teams advanced behind wet cloth masks. They used forked poles, ropes, and shields to isolate each man. Resistance remained fierce. A bandit broke a worker's finger. Another drove a spike through a shield and nearly struck Lyra's chest. She trapped his hand between 2 drying racks until Bess tied him. At the southern creek, the archers reached the brittle shelf. Kira had predicted they would keep distance between them after seeing the channel traps. She waited until the first 2 crossed, then signaled Mira. The release gate opened. Water from an upper storage trough ran into cracks beneath the shelf. The clay did not collapse at once. It sagged. One archer noticed and jumped back. The second pushed forward. Their movement broke the edge. 3 men slid down the bank in a wave of mud and roots. Their bows snapped or vanished. The remaining 2 turned toward the road. Kira had left the road open. Evelyn stood there with 6 villagers carrying lanterns. Behind them waited the wives and mothers of several local men Havel had recruited as guides. Evelyn had spent the afternoon before the attack tracing unusual purchases of oil, cloth masks, and cheap liquor. She knew which households had received sudden coin. When the fleeing guides saw their families, they dropped their weapons. The hired archers did not. One seized Evelyn and put a knife to her throat. Rain saw it from across the field and ran. The archer dragged Evelyn backward, demanding a horse. There were no horses on the farm. He demanded coin. Evelyn told him the coin reserve had been moved, and that killing her would leave him surrounded by people who knew his face. Her voice remained controlled, but her hand gripped his wrist hard enough for the knuckles to pale. Kira approached from the side. The archer saw her and shifted the knife. Evelyn stamped his foot and dropped her weight. The blade cut the skin beneath her jaw, but missed the artery. Kira struck the man's elbow with her staff. Rain reached them a moment later and drove his shoulder into the archer's chest. They fell together. The man hit Rain twice in the bruised ribs, found the old injury, and crest. Pain narrowed Rain's sight. He could not overpower the man. Evelyn grabbed a fistful of mud and pushed it into the archer's eyes. Kira trapped his knife hand beneath her staff. Rain rolled free. Bess and the villagers secured the man. The fight lasted 47 minutes. It left 2 defenders badly injured, 7 with cuts or bruises, 1 burned shed, a damaged root field, and a broken pump lever. 3 attackers had fractures. 1 had inhaled too much smoke. None had died. Selena turned the treatment room into triage. She assigned colored cords according to urgency. A defender with a deep thigh cut received pressure and stitches first. The bandit, who struggled to breathe, received steam, an open airway, and the antidote tea. Noel's arm was cleaned after bleeding stopped. Evelyn's neck cut needed 3 stitches. 1 worker objected to treating attackers before minor injuries among their own people. Selena stated that medical priority followed danger, not loyalty. Rain backed her authority. At dawn, 21 captives sat tied beneath the barn awning. 12 were hired bandits from outside the district. 9 were local guides or laborers promised food and debt forgiveness by Havel. The attack had not been planned with Havel's usual patience. He had learned that copies of the water claim and alder deed had left the district, then ordered his storekeeper to assemble men within 2 days. Havel refused to release more coin until the farm burned. The storekeeper filled the gap with warehouse scrip, local debt promises, and whatever oil he could remove without a second clerk. The haste created witnesses and records that a slower conspiracy might have avoided. Rain placed 3 choices before them. The outsiders could be turned over to the district guard with evidence of arson and armed attack. They could provide truthful statements, identify the person who hired them, and work under supervised contracts to pay for damage. Anyone who lied or escaped would face the original charges. The local men could give statements and perform restitution labor. Their families would not lose water credits or medical access because of their actions. The bandit leader laughed. He said Havel would deny everything and the district guard belonged to Baron Soren. Evelyn brought out a leather payment token taken from his pocket. It was ordinary warehouse scrip, but the tally cut on its edge matched a private series used by Havel's storekeeper and recorded by the village scribe. Kira produced the route map drawn by the local guide after the storekeeper described the targets. Mira matched the 3-stud boot print at the earlier sabotage to one captured man's boot. 2 villagers had watched oil jars being transferred from a store cart behind Havel's hall during the hurried recruitment. It was not enough. Rain asked the leader what Havel had promised: food, safe passage, and 5 silver after the farm burned. Rain asked how much had been paid in advance: 3 silver for the entire group. The bandit leader's expression changed when Evelyn explained the numbers. Havel had claimed the farm held 50 silver in cash. He planned for the attackers to risk hanging while he kept most of the value. Rain offered written labor contracts, full food rations, medical treatment, and 1 silver per month for skilled repair work after restitution. The rate was lower than banditry when banditry succeeded, but much higher than prison labor. 6 outsiders accepted before noon. The leader held out until Selena reset his brother's broken wrist and told him the hand could still recover if kept clean. He gave a statement, naming Havel. The book opened above Rain's exhausted vision. Organized attack repelled. Household fatalities, 0. Enemy fatalities, 0. Evidence preservation, high. Average trust, 53%. Family synergy level, increased. Rain looked toward the village. Havel's grain hall door was shut. 2 guards had disappeared. The battle for the farm was over. The battle over who controlled Dunridge had begun. Bram Havel did not wait to be accused. By mid-morning, he sent word that Rain Alder had raised a private army, poisoned lawful visitors, and taken villagers hostage. He ordered every resident to gather in the square for judgment. Rain arrived with no spear. The 5 women walked beside him. Lyra carried the seed ledger. Mira carried a section of cut condenser metal and the broken pump lever. Selena carried treatment records. Kira carried the bandits' route map. Evelyn carried the marriage charter, the land deed, the water notice, and 12 signed statements. Behind them came the captured local attackers with their hands untied. Each wore a white cord showing that he had agreed to testify. The outside bandits remained under guard at the farm. Havel stood on the same platform where the marriage had been forced. He had armed guards at both stairs and the village bell rope in his hand. His silver chain gleamed above a clean red coat. He began with Rain's debt. He said a debtor had no right to create contracts, sell water, employ criminals, or withhold crops from lawful authority. Evelyn asked the scribe to read the debt instrument aloud. Havel refused. The crowd stirred. Old Toven raised his one arm and reminded everyone that Havel had also refused to show the ledger on the wedding day. Rain did not accuse Havel of stealing. He asked for verification. If the debt was correct, the household would acknowledge it. If interest or fees had been altered, the total would be corrected. Havel ordered the guards to remove him. The guards looked at the crowd and stayed where they were. Evelyn then presented the water ordinance. The village scribe confirmed that it covered public wells within the marked boundary. Kira and Mira showed the old boundary landmarks. 3 elderly farmers remembered the white oak and sheepfold from childhood. He said the aquifer itself crossed beneath village land. and therefore belonged to the office. Mira could not hear the argument, but she watched mouths and gestures. She stepped onto the platform, placed 6 bowls in a line, and poured water through a long piece of cloth that ran beneath them. She then pointed to one bowl and closed her hand around the entire cloth. The demonstration made the absurdity visible. Water moved, one person owning every drop because some passed beneath his house would allow every upstream landowner to kill those below. Rain proposed a measured community agreement. The farm would maintain the pump and protect the aquifer. Dunridge households would receive a defined emergency ration based on sustainable output. Commercial users would pay. No headman could seize the system without compensation and household consent. The crowd reacted well until Havel raised the attack. He claimed the men had gone to inspect stolen water and were ambushed. Kira unfolded the route map, showing 3 armed groups, fire targets, and escape paths. Lyra displayed the oil-stained cloth recovered from the drying shed. Mira held up the severed condenser sheet. Selena read the injuries of both defenders and attackers, noting that every captive had received treatment. Then the local guides testified. One after another, they described being recruited by Havel's storekeeper. They had been promised grain, debt forgiveness, and protection. Their orders were to burn the drying shed, seize seeds, break the pump, and leave evidence that monsters had attacked. Havel shouted that hungry men would say anything for Rain's food. The bandit leader entered the square. Rain had not planned to bring him. Evelyn had. She knew Havel would dismiss villagers as dependents. An outsider with no loyalty to Rain carried different weight. The leader named the meeting place, the payment token, and the exact words used by Havel's storekeeper. He also stated that Havel lied about the farm's money and intended the bandits to take the blame. Havel pulled the bell rope. The bell rang once. 20 men in the Baron's colors entered from the northern street. Their captain, Darren Holt, wore a sun-faded blue cloak and a sword that had been repaired near the hilt. He had the face of a soldier who slept badly and counted rations carefully. Havel smiled and accused Rain of rebellion. Captain Holt asked to see the bodies. There were none. He asked to see the prisoners. Rain said they were alive, treated, and available for questioning. He asked to see Havel's authority for the water seizure and the debt ledger. Havel produced the Baron's tax seal, but not the ledger. The captain's expression hardened. Baron Sorn had sent him after receiving 2 packets of copied evidence from travelers on the district road. Evelyn's messengers had succeeded. Holt had also received complaints that Havel reported less grain than soldiers collected during the last levy. Someone was hiding the difference. The grain haul was searched. Behind a false wall, soldiers found 30 sacks of barley, the remaining jars from the same numbered lamp oil lot used in the attack, and the missing medicine chest. A lockbox containing debt notes rewritten with higher interest was also there. Havel had considered the grain haul untouchable and expected the hired outsiders to leave the district before dawn. He had kept food while children starved, sold part of the military levy on the side, and blamed the shortage on villagers. The crowd surged toward him. Rain climbed the platform and ordered the farm workers to form a barrier. A beating in the square would destroy records and allow every accomplice to claim mob violence. Captain Holt arrested Havel, the storekeeper, and 2 guards. He sealed the grain haul and announced a district investigation. The stored barley created an immediate question. The army seal marked part of it as royal property. Villagers believed all of it had been taken from them illegally. Holt could not simply surrender military grain. Rain proposed that the sacks be weighed and traced against the levy records. Grain proven stolen from households would return to them. The army portion would remain sealed, but could be exchanged for fresh ration cakes at equal nutritional value, reducing spoilage. Holt accepted because his soldiers were also hungry. Dunridge needed an interim headman. Several villagers shouted Rain's name. The farm already depended on his coordination. Combining food, water, debt records, and village law under one person would recreate Havel's power with a kinder face. Rain proposed a 5-member council elected for 6 months with public accounts and no member controlling both stores and enforcement. Captain Holt invoked the district emergency clause used when a headman was arrested. It allowed him to supervise a temporary election, but not to select the officers. The scribe read the rule aloud. Each resident household received one marked bean. Candidates stood in the square, while the beans were counted on an open cloth. Old Tovin, the widow Marin, the carpenter, a herder, and the village scribe received the highest totals and were sworn for 6 months. The scribe had tried to remove his own name until Evelyn told him fear was not innocence and public service was one way to repair years of silence. The elected council's first act approved the community water agreement. Its second created a public grain ledger. Its third asked Selena to supervise distribution of the recovered food to the sickest households. Holt also approved the prisoner's disposition under the district restitution statute. 7 outsiders, including the leader and his injured brother, signed supervised work bonds. 5 chose district trial and were taken north under guard. The 9 local participants owed 6 weeks of repair and drainage labor, but their families retained the emergency water and medical minimum. The first contracted wages would begin only after the recorded damage had been repaid. By evening, Dunridge had changed rulers without a corpse. The victory did not erase the debt. It did not repair the fields. It did not remove Baron Sorn, who had benefited from Havel's corruption whether or not he ordered it. Captain Holt visited the farm before returning north. He inspected Mira's pump, tasted a ration cake, and studied Rain's labor board. He asked how many cakes the household could produce in 1 week. Rain asked how many the army wanted. Holt said as many as existed. Evelyn stepped between them and asked what price the army intended to pay. The captain almost smiled. He said the Baron would decide. That answer placed a larger shadow over the field than Havel ever had. Baron Varick Sorn arrived in Dunridge with 40 soldiers, 3 clerks, 6 wagons, and a cook who carried his own water. He was younger than Rain expected, perhaps 38, with close-cut blonde hair and a narrow face burned red across the nose. His coat was practical riding wool rather than silk. He looked like a man who understood hardship and had decided that understanding gave him permission to impose it on others. The Baron inspected the recovered grain, listened to Havel's charges, and ordered the former headman taken to the district prison. He praised Rain for restoring order. Then he issued an emergency tax. Drought had reduced the barony's military stores. Monsters threatened the North Road. The Crown expected troops for a border campaign. Every producer would surrender 60% of food output until the emergency ended. The order treated seed, wages, household rations, and market goods as the same category. At current production, the farm could survive 1 month after paying. Dunridge would lose the ration cakes supporting its weakest families. Workers would leave. Deep well planting would stop. The next harvest would shrink, creating another levy on a smaller base. Rain presented the calculation. Baron Sorn listened and said survival was not the same as obedience. Evelyn requested the written basis for 60%. The Royal Emergency Statute allowed up to 1/3 of market surplus, unless invasion was formally declared. No invasion had been declared. The Baron's chief clerk produced a military necessity order signed by Sorn himself. It expanded the definition of surplus to include stored food above 7 days. Rain recognized the tactic. The order created the emergency it claimed to solve. He did not refuse openly. Soldiers stood around the farm, and resistance would end in seizure. Instead, he asked for 3 days to inventory taxable output accurately. The Baron granted 1. The household worked through the night. Evelyn separated ownership categories. Seed belonged to the seed fund under the household charter. Wages already owed to workers were liabilities, not surplus. Water credits represented prepaid labor. Medical reserves had been donated for public treatment. Some grain belonged to villagers who stored it in the cellar for safety. Mira measured pump depreciation and maintenance needs. Lyra estimated seed replacement rates. Selena calculated minimum nutrition for 6 adults, 23 workers, and the patients dependent on the kitchen. Kira predicted harvest loss if laborers abandoned the fields. Rain turned the farm into a balance sheet. At dawn, taxable surplus appeared far smaller than the Baron expected. Sorn accused them of hiding food. Rain opened every store. The Baron found no secret granary, because there was none. The household's strength came from movement. Roots entered the kitchen. Cakes left for wages and trade. Mushrooms grew in active beds. Seed remained planted or recorded. Coin funded repairs before it could become luxury. Sorn changed the assessment method. He taxed production capacity rather than current stores. Evelyn had anticipated that. She asked whether the Baron would also accept liability for crop failure if he claimed ownership of capacity. Under property law, a lord taking future yield assumed a share of input costs and risk. The chief clerk whispered to Sorn. The Baron reduced the demand to 40% of finished ration cakes for 6 weeks, paid at 1 copper per 12 cakes. The price did not cover the full cost of ingredients, fuel, and labor. Rain countered with 1 copper per 6 cakes, capped at 30% of output. The army would provide salt, 120 kilograms of barley as an input advance, and transport. In return, the farm would train military bakers to produce the cakes using licensed seed purchased after harvest. Sorn saw the technology within reach. He agreed to the quantity, but cut the price to 1 copper per 8 cakes. Evelyn accepted only after adding late payment penalties, weight standards, and a clause forbidding seizure of breeding seed. The contract kept the farm alive. It also chained its labor to the army for 6 weeks. Rain signed only after the supply sheet balanced. Staggered deep well plots were expected to yield 1,200 kilograms during the contract. Household and consigned stores held 250 kilograms of usable grain, which the army advance raised to 370. Selena's cellars held 95 kilograms of dried mushroom powder, with new trays maturing each week. Workers had pledged 18 cartloads of dung fuel and deadwood. At the planned peak, 42 days of production required about 1,080 kilograms of root, 360 kilograms of grain, and 90 kilograms of mushroom powder. The margin was narrow, but it existed. Production expanded in 4 stages. Mira built a larger press with a counterweighted beam. Lyra standardized root size, enough for predictable cooking. Selena redesigned the recipe to tolerate rough military storage. Kira scheduled work around heat waves. Evelyn hired 30 additional villagers and paid partly in food. Rain divided operations into shifts. He required rest periods after a worker collapsed beside the steamer. Every accident and spoiled batch was recorded. Output rose from 84 cakes per day to 360. The army wagons arrived late and overloaded. Their quartermaster rejected 2 batches for being underweight, though his scale was wrong. Evelyn produced certified stones from the village market and proved the error. He then claimed moisture made the cakes heavier at the farm than at delivery. Mira built sealed sample boxes and marked each batch before loading. When payment came 10 days late, Evelyn charged the penalty. The quartermaster laughed until Captain Holt enforced the contract. Baron Sorn heard that his own officers sided with the farm. He transferred Holt to road patrol. The work created tension inside the household. Lyra hated watching military wagons carry away food, while Dunridge still rationed. Evelyn argued that breaking the contract would invite seizure and destroy their legal position. Selena saw patients whose portions had been reduced because flour went to army cakes. Mira needed iron for the press, but the army took every useful scrap. Kira returned from scouting with news that boneback boars were moving toward the root fields. Rain became the target of every frustration because he had coordinated the bargain. One evening, Lyra accused him of turning her crop into the Baron's weapon. She did not shout. She placed the seed ledger on the table and asked whether the household's promise of shared control still mattered when soldiers waited at the gate. Rain answered that he had accepted the contract to prevent immediate seizure. Lyra asked whether fear would make every future decision for them. The question stayed with him. He reopened the agreement to a household vote, even though it had already been signed. Canceling would carry penalties and likely violence. Continuing would cost food and trust. He wrote each option, condition, and penalty on the meeting slate and turned it toward Mira before anyone voted. Mira voted to continue for 2 more weeks, while building hidden capacity in legal ways. Selena voted to continue, only if patient rations returned to minimum levels. Kira voted to continue, because the road patrol was keeping monsters away from village houses. Evelyn voted to continue and begin preparing a challenge to the emergency order. Lyra voted to stop. Rain voted to continue under the added conditions. The decision passed 5-1. Rain did not treat the majority as permission to ignore Lyra. He reaffirmed her existing final authority over breeding seed in writing, and prohibited any use for military production without her signature. He also assigned a separate field for village nutrition, protected from contract output. Lyra remained angry for 3 days. She kept working. On the 4th day, she found Rain asleep beside the production ledger, with his dinner untouched. She covered the page with a cloth before steam damaged it and left half a deep-well cake beside his hand. The gesture did not end the dispute. It showed the dispute had not ended the relationship. The Baron's 6-week contract concluded with every required shipment delivered. The farm received less profit than a free market sale would have provided, but it gained military salt, transport experience, trained workers, and contracts bearing the Baron's seal. Evelyn used those contracts to petition the provincial court. She argued that Soren's emergency order exceeded royal limits and damaged future tax capacity. The drought did not wait. A fever appeared in the eastern row of Dunridge 3 days after the last army wagon left. Within a week, 40 people were sick. The first patient arrived at Selina's treatment room with stomach pain, high fever, and skin dry as paper. The second could not keep water down. The third was a child from an outlying house beyond the regular cart route. The family's commercial water credits had expired, but the emergency drinking minimum was still supposed to continue. A delivery barrel had broken an axle, and a council clerk failed to issue replacement tokens from the reserve. After 2 missed deliveries, the family drew water from an open ditch. Rain recorded the case as a failure of the new system, rather than the family's fault. He separated emergency drinking allotments from all commercial credits, assigned a backup card, and required the council to post missed deliveries before sunset. By sunset, Selina knew the illness spread through contamination, not air or curses. She did not know which exact organism caused it. She did not need the name to understand the route. Human waste had entered the village's remaining surface water. Dunridge's old drainage ditch had cracked near the eastern houses. During a brief rain, runoff carried waste from overflowing pits into a low pond. Families desperate for water collected it after the mud settled. Boiling had become less common because fuel was scarce. Selina ordered the pond closed. The village council hesitated. More than 80 people depended on it. Rain backed her and offered emergency pump water, though the farm supply could not support everyone indefinitely. She found the cracked section had sunk above an old storage tunnel. Repair required stone, lime, and at least 40 laborers. Selina established an isolation house in the empty grain hall. Patients with severe vomiting went to one side. Recovering patients went to the other. Families received marked buckets for waste. Workers dug a covered disposal trench downhill from any water source. She prepared a drink from boiled water, salt, and measured sugar from Evelyn's trade stock. The mixture replaced fluid more effectively than plain water. She also used thin root broth and mushroom protein when patients could eat. The treatment looked too simple to many villagers. They expected rare herbs, chanting, or an expensive tonic. Salt water seemed like an insult. Then patients who drank it survived at a higher rate. Selina tracked every case. Of the first 12 severe patients, 5 who arrived late died. Of the next 30 patients who showed the same severe danger signs but reached treatment earlier, 2 died. Among the remaining mild and moderate cases, 4 later died after complications or delayed reporting. The deaths struck her each time. She washed the bodies herself and spoke to the families with direct facts rather than promises. Rain organized fuel collection. Kira mapped deadwood areas that could be harvested without entering monster territory. Lyra diverted part of the deepwell crop to patient broth. Evelyn suspended debt collection on water credits and negotiated with the army depot for 2 wagons of lime in exchange for future pump repairs. Mira led the drainage reconstruction. She could not hear shouted warnings in a work pit, So she created a visual command system. Red cloth meant stop. White meant lift. Blue meant clear the trench. Workers learned to watch her hands and the signal boards. She placed timber braces every half body length and tested each by vibration before allowing excavation below. On the second day, the old storage tunnel collapsed anyway. The eastern wall moved first. Mira felt it through her knees and raised the red cloth. Most workers climbed out. A young man named Joss slipped beneath a falling beam. Rain entered the trench with a rope around his waist. Mira grabbed his sleeve and drew a quick diagram in mud. Pulling the beam upward would release the wall behind it. They had to brace first. Joss screamed under the weight. The easy action was to lift immediately. The correct action took time. Mira directed workers to drive 2 posts at angles, while Rain kept Joss conscious. Selena crawled close enough to check the trapped leg. Blood flow remained, but the foot was cooling. The wall shifted again. One brace cracked. Mira changed the load path. She inserted a shorter beam beneath the broken one and used the wagon jack Evelyn had borrowed from the army. The screw rose 1 turn at a time. When the pressure moved to the new brace, 12 workers lifted together. Selena treated a crushed ankle and deep cuts. The leg survived, though Joss would limp. The collapse delayed the drainage repair by 2 days. Fever cases rose to 91. A temple delegation arrived from the town of Belcross on the 3rd day. Brother Caldus, a senior healer in white and gold robes, brought 4 assistants, boxes of medicine, and a sealed order, declaring the grain hall an unauthorized clinic. The regional temple claimed legal authority over epidemic treatment. It charged standard fees for blessed medicines. Families unable to pay could sign service pledges. Selena read the order and continued mixing rehydration drink. Caldus accused her of dangerous practice. He had heard she grew medicine in contaminated cellars, used unapproved herbs, and treated people without temple examination. Selena invited him to inspect everything. He expected defiance. Openness unsettled him. The mushroom rooms were clean. Instruments boiled between patients. Waste routes were marked. Records showed dosage and outcomes. Caldus found no obvious ritual or poison. He objected to Selena's refusal to use temple fever draught. She asked for its ingredients. The formula was proprietary. She asked whether it replaced lost water and salts. Caldus said it purified the body's heat. Selena offered to compare results. Half the patients would receive her protocol. Half would receive the temple draught in addition to adequate water, since she would not deny hydration. A proper temple treatment could not be tested by an unlicensed woman accused of killing patients. The charge reached the families. Old fear returned quickly. A mother pulled her son from the recovery side and bought temple medicine with her wedding ring. The boy worsened overnight because the draught caused sleep and reduced drinking. Selena found him before dawn, barely conscious. She stopped the draft, cooled him with wet cloth, and fed spoonfuls of salt sugar water for 6 hours. Caldus protested until Rain placed the written treatment record before him and asked whether he would sign responsibility for withholding fluids. He did not sign. Caldus then changed tactics. He sealed Selena's instrument case under church authority and ordered her to appear for inquiry in Belcross after the epidemic. Rain could have hidden the tools. Selena surrendered them. She used boiled sewing needles, kitchen knives, and glass fragments smoothed over flame. Her work slowed. More hands were needed for cleaning and measurement. She trained village women to mix precise solutions and identify danger signs. By the 7th day, the repaired drain carried waste away from the eastern pond. Mira's crew lined the cracked section with stone and lime. Rain organized every household into a boiling rotation, so fuel could serve several families at once. Kira predicted a hot wind that would increase dehydration and adjusted water deliveries in advance. The outbreak peaked at 134 cases. 11 people died. Without intervention, Selena estimated the number would have been several times higher. She did not use the estimate to comfort herself. She wrote every dead person's name in the ledger. Brother Caldus left for Belcross with his unused medicine boxes and Selena's sealed instruments. Before leaving, he copied 3 pages of her outcome records without permission. Evelyn noticed. She said a man preparing only to punish would not need the data. Selena answered that institutions often wanted evidence they could rename as their own. Rain promised the inquiry would not be faced alone. Selena looked at him for a long moment. She had heard promises before. This one came after he had entered a collapsing trench, defended her medical authority against his own workers, and placed the epidemic accounts where anyone could inspect them. She touched his healed rib through his shirt, checking the old injury, then left her hand there, 1 second longer than an examination required. Rain did not turn the moment into a claim. The book recorded the change quietly. Selena trust. Romantic affinity detected. Consent threshold not reached. No action required. Rain closed the display and returned to the water schedule. Belcross had water in its fountain. The town sat beside a deep stone aqueduct, built before the current kingdom. Merchants paid to fill barrels, while guards kept famine refugees outside the walls. Temple roofs shone with copper. The market sold dried fruit at prices that could feed a Dunridge family for a week. Rain entered with Selena, Evelyn, Captain Holt, Old Tovin, and Pella's mother. Mira remained at the farm to supervise water systems. Lyra protected the seedbeds. Kira shadowed the road in case the Baron's men tried to stop them. The temple inquiry took place in a public healing hall. Brother Caldus sat beside Archdeacon Orson, a heavy-eyed administrator who smelled of incense and ink. 3 licensed healers occupied the witness bench. The charge was not formal heresy. Evelyn had forced the temple clerk to state that clearly before proceedings began. The temple accused Selena of unlicensed medical practice, unauthorized preparation of restricted compounds, misuse of burial fungus, and 11 deaths during the Dunridge outbreak. Selena wore her patched gray coat. Her hands rested flat on the table, so no one could see them tremble. The temple presented the 3 deaths from the previous winter first. Relatives described fever, bleeding, and Selena's failed treatments. Grief made every answer sharp. Selena did not defend herself with excuses. She acknowledged that she lacked clean tools and used substitutes. She explained what she would do differently now. She accepted responsibility for not closing the treatment room when supplies became unsafe, even though closing it would have left patients with no care. The honesty confused the Archdeacon. He expected denial. Then Evelyn requested the village medicine chest record. The temple had none. Captain Holt produced Havel's confiscation inventory. The locked chest contained clean needles, fever bark, alcohol, and bandages that Selena had requested before the deaths. Havel's storekeeper denied access because the patients could not pay. The court record shifted. Selena's failure remained real, but the material conditions became part of the cause. Brother Caldus introduced the 11 epidemic deaths. Rain submitted the complete case ledger. It contained 134 names, arrival condition, treatment, water intake, and outcome. The temple had copied only the pages containing deaths. Evelyn asked the licensed healers to estimate expected mortality separately for late severe cases treated early, and mild or moderate cases under drought conditions. They resisted. The Archdeacon required an answer. For late severe cases, their estimates ranged from 1 in 3 to 1 in 2. For severe cases treated before prolonged dehydration, they expected between 1 in 5 and 1 in 3. They agreed that mild and moderate cases should remain far lower if clean water and continued observation were available. Dunridge's ledger showed 5 deaths among 12 late severe cases, 2 among 30 severe cases treated earlier, and 4 among 92 mild or moderate cases. The comparisons used like groups rather than hiding severity inside one total. The complete result remained 11 deaths among 134 patients, and arrival time clearly changed survival. Caldus argued that the numbers were unreliable because Selena controlled the records. Pella's mother testified that village volunteers wrote copies each night. Old Tovin produced them. Minor errors existed, which made fabrication less likely. The restricted compounds charge concerned sleep smoke used during the farm attack, and poppy medicine given in controlled doses. Selena explained quantities, ventilation, and antidotes. The temple healers agreed the formulation was medically plausible, though not licensed. The burial fungus charge carried more danger. Temple doctrine associated mushrooms from death sites with impurity. Selena's edible culture came from spoiled grain, not graves, but Caldus used the common fear. Rain asked permission for a demonstration. He placed 2 covered bowls before the inquiry. One held temple bread, bought that morning. The other held a ration cake containing mushroom protein. He asked the healers to inspect both for contamination using any method they trusted. The ration cake passed. The temple bread showed early mold near the center because it had been stored warm. Selena did not claim all fungus was safe. She explained that classification by source, appearance, and controlled growth mattered more than superstition. Some fungi poisoned, some fed, some produced medicine. Calling them all impure made people less safe because they stopped observing differences. The public gallery murmured. Archdeacon Orson called a recess. During the break, Caldus approached Selena alone near the fountain. Rain remained close enough to intervene, but far enough to let her choose the exchange. Caldus admitted that he had copied the outcome pages because the salt-sugar solution worked. Temple doctrine did not forbid water and salt, but the method threatened their fee structure. If families could prepare part of treatment at home, the temple could not charge for every dose. Selena asked how many people had died, protecting that income. Caldus looked toward the sealed medicine boxes. He did not answer. The inquiry resumed with a compromise prepared behind closed doors. The temple offered Selena a subordinate license. She could practice in Dunridge under Brother Caldus's authority, use approved formulas, and send a portion of fees to Belcross. In return, the charges would be dismissed. Rain expected her to refuse immediately. Selena asked to read the terms. She studied each line, then proposed changes. The Dunridge Clinic would publish treatment methods for common dehydration and nutrition illness. Fees would be transparent. No patient could be required to sign a service pledge for emergency care. Temple medicines used in public outbreaks would disclose active ingredients to licensed healers. Selena would submit outcome records for review, and a temple would provide instruments, alcohol, and training in surgical techniques she lacked. The archdeacon objected that she demanded privileges beyond her station. Selena answered that she offered data beyond anything the temple possessed. Evelyn added that the provincial court would be interested in a public institution concealing effective famine treatment. Captain Holt mentioned the army had begun using the farm's rehydration drink after seeing results in Dunridge. The archdeacon understood leverage. The final agreement created the Belcross Community Healing Charter. Selena received an independent rural license, subject to annual review. The temple retained authority over major surgery and controlled medicines. Emergency hydration formulas became public. Fees could be waived for famine cases. Caldus was assigned to inspect the Dunridge Clinic every 3 months, an arrangement neither he nor Selena enjoyed. Selena's instruments were returned with a new set of needles, 2 scalpels, glass jars, and a copper sterilizing tray. Outside the hall, she sat on the fountain edge and opened the case repeatedly, checking each tool. Rain told her the household medical fund would cover anything missing. She said that was not why her hands shook. For years, she had believed the deaths proved she should never treat anyone again. Then, people kept arriving because no one else would help. She had continued out of necessity, not confidence. The trial forced her to examine every failure in public and still claim the right to work. Rain said the right came with responsibility, and she had accepted more of it than anyone in the hall. Selena closed the case. She leaned forward and kissed his cheek. It was brief and deliberate. She told him not to turn it into an entry on the household ledger. Rain promised only medical expenses would be itemized. She laughed hard enough to wipe tears from one eye. When they returned to Dunridge, Lyra noticed the change before anyone spoke. Her gaze moved from Selena to Rain, then to the new instrument case. She congratulated Selena and spent the rest of the evening trimming roots with more force than necessary. Kira watched from the doorway, half asleep. She later informed Rain that Lyra was jealous at a probability of 68%. Rain asked whether Kira analyzed everything. She said only things likely to become dangerous. Then she fell asleep against his shoulder. The first deep-well harvest large enough to feed Dunridge came at the end of summer. Rows of purple-tipped leaves covered the southern field. Beneath them, roots reached into soil that had been useless for wheat. The scale came from multiplication recorded in Lyra's ledger, not from one miraculous plant. 6 originals became 18 root divisions, then hundreds of seed-grown plants, then more than 4,000 viable root sets across successive beds. Each mature plant produced a cluster of water-rich roots. The harvest crews pulled 23 tons of fresh weight from ground that had produced less than 2 tons of barley. Lyra walked each row before digging began. She selected the best plants for seed, marked experimental lines, and rejected roots with soft centers. Every worker carried a chart showing which colors belonged in food baskets and which belonged in the breeding shed. At noon, riders from the Crowned Furrow Guild entered the field. The guild controlled certified seed across 3 provinces. Its inspectors wore green coats and bronze badges shaped like sheaves. Their leader, Master Pell, presented an order declaring Deepwell root an unregistered crop. The entire harvest was to be seized for examination. Planting or trade would stop until the guild determined whether it threatened established agriculture. Lyra read the order in silence. For years, farmers had punished her for producing unfamiliar plants. Now the unfamiliar plant worked, and a more powerful institution intended to take it. Master Pell offered her a private arrangement. She could join the guild as a contracted breeder. The guild would provide land, workers, and a laboratory. Every variety she created would belong to them. In return, she would receive a salary and protection from prosecution. He spoke as though rescue had arrived. Lyra asked whether farmers could save seed from their own harvest. Pell said controlled distribution protected quality. She asked whether starving villages could breed local varieties. He said unauthorized breeding created instability. Lyra declined. The inspectors began marking storage sheds for seizure. Rain did not order workers to block them. The guild's charter carried royal authority, and physical resistance would give Pell grounds to call soldiers. Evelyn requested a copy of the full registration law, not the summary order. Pell had brought only extracts. Evelyn sent a rider to Belcross and another to the provincial archive. Meanwhile, Rain negotiated custody. The harvest would remain sealed on the farm under joint locks. 1 key stayed with Pell, 1 with Lyra, a third with the village council. Food required for immediate famine relief would be released daily under written count. Pell accepted because he expected the law to favor him. For 5 days, the farm operated beneath guild supervision. Inspectors weighed roots, collected seeds, and interviewed workers. One tried to enter Lyra's private breeding shed after dark. Mira's vibration line triggered a lamp signal, and Kira found the man with a copied key. Pell claimed he was checking security. Lyra demanded the man's removal from the inspection team. Rain supported her. Pell refused until the village council threatened to record the incident as attempted theft. The legal texts arrived on the 6th day. The Crowned Furrow Charter covered certified grain, orchard stock, and commercial seed sold across district lines. It granted the guild power to prevent false labeling and diseased stock. It did not ban a household from breeding food for its own land. It also contained an old famine clause. When a district suffered 3 failed staple harvests, communities could distribute emergency planting material under local supervision until normal supply recovered. Dunridge qualified. Pell responded that Deepwell root was being sold in ration cakes and therefore entered commerce. Evelyn separated the transactions. The farm sold processed food, not planting material. The few roots provided to neighboring households had been recorded as famine relief through the village council. Pell argued that Lyra's crop might spread aggressively and damage soil. Lyra produced trial records covering salt use, water draw, root depth, pests, and cross-pollination. The plant could reproduce only through seed or root pieces. It did not spread by runners. Its flowers were mostly self-contained. She had kept barrier rows around the test plots. The guild had no comparable drought crop and no evidence of danger. Pell still possessed influence. He offered the village council a compromise. The guild would purchase the entire seed reserve for a generous sum and return certified seed the following year. The price was enough to pay Rain's old debt twice. Some villagers urged acceptance. Coin could buy grain immediately. A guild partnership might protect them from Baron Sorn. Lyra stood before the council with dirt on her knees, and told them what the price did not include. It did not include next year's planting rights. It did not include freedom to improve the crop. It did not include a guarantee that seed would return at an affordable price. The guild was not buying roots. It was buying dependence. Rain asked her what alternative she offered. Lyra proposed a seed cooperative. Every farmer receiving deep well seed would sign 3 conditions. They would keep records, return 1.5 times the seed after harvest if the crop succeeded, and share any useful variation with the cooperative. Failed crops owed nothing. The central breeding lines would remain under Lyra's management, but local families could develop their own strains. No one could claim exclusive ownership of the base crop. Evelyn added a license for outside districts. Wealthy estates would pay. Famine villages would receive reduced terms. Revenue would fund testing and storage. Mira designed sealed clay seed tubes with moisture indicators. Selena created inspection rules for fungus. Kira mapped climate zones for different trial lines. Rain built the distribution schedule. Family synergy activated. Within 2 weeks, the cooperative registered as a local famine institution under the old clause. 37 Dunridge households joined. Captain Holt delivered the provincial clerk's recognition, having carried the filing through road posts that Pell's allies controlled. Master Pell removed his seals from the harvest sheds. He warned that the Crowned Furrow Guild had survived kings and rebellions. One village crop would not defeat it. Rain answered that no one had asked the guild to be defeated. They had asked it to stop owning work it did not perform. Pell left with copies of the trial data he was legally entitled to inspect. He also left with less information than he wanted. Lyra's breeding intuition could not be copied from a page. That evening, Lyra sat alone in the seed shed. Rows of clay tubes lined the shelves. Rain found her holding the original 6 black seed husks in her palm. She said the guild's offer had tempted her. A laboratory, good soil, and trained assistants could accelerate her work. She hated that refusing power also meant refusing tools that might save lives. Rain told her they could build the tools slowly. The choice belonged to her, even if she later changed her mind. Lyra asked whether he would truly let her leave after everything the farm invested. He reminded her that her share of the household remained hers. Investment was not a chain. She closed her fingers around the husks. Then she reached up, caught the front of his shirt, and kissed him. The kiss carried weeks of anger, relief, and restrained fear. Rain did not move closer until she did. When she released him, her freckles had disappeared beneath a deep flush. She said Selena would become unbearable if she learned Lyra had needed a legal crisis to act. From the open window, Selena informed her that the walls were thin. Kira's sleepy laughter came from somewhere outside. Lyra covered her face with both hands. Rain remained wise enough not to speak. The Seed Guild failed to seize Deepwell Root. The merchant houses tried to make it worthless. In early autumn, wagons from Belcross arrived with imported barley priced below the cost of transport. The merchants sold to Dunridge families on credit and offered free sacks to taverns that stopped buying ration cakes. At first, villagers celebrated. Cheap grain filled bowls. Evelyn inspected the contracts. The price lasted 30 days. After that, interest doubled each month. Borrowers pledged future harvests and water rights as security. The merchant houses were not losing money to feed Dunridge. They were purchasing claims on the next season. Many families signed anyway. Hunger had trained them to value food in hand above danger on paper. Ration cake sales fell by 60%. Workers asked to be paid in barley because it looked cheaper. The farm's coin reserve shrank. Deepwell roots remained in storage, while interest on the Alder debt continued. Rain proposed lowering prices. Evelyn refused. Matching a subsidized price would drain reserves faster than the merchants. The farm could not. Instead, she changed the product. Barley was cheap. Fuel, salt, medicine, and transport were not. Evelyn stopped presenting ration cakes as ordinary food. She sold them to mines, patrols, caravans, and work crews who valued storage life and compact weight. She bundled cakes with rehydration salt packets and simple cooking instructions. She also created a village storage note. Families could deposit deep well roots in the cool cellar and receive a paper claim for a measured amount. They could redeem the claim later or trade it to someone else. The notes prevented families from selling the entire harvest at the lowest autumn price. The idea depended on trust. Rain required weekly public counts. Mira installed 3 locks controlled by different people. Lyra reserved enough food before any note could be issued. Kira monitored roads and storage risk. The merchants attacked the notes as false money. Evelyn agreed. They were not coin. They were warehouse claims, a practice used by noble estates for generations. She made that distinction clear on every page. Merchant agents then bought salt across the district and raised the price 4-fold. Without salt, ration cakes spoiled faster, and Selena's clinic could not mix rehydration drink. Evelyn had anticipated pressure on an essential input, though not which one. She opened negotiations with the Grey Cap mines north of the Monster Ravines. The mines produced iron and a small amount of rock salt, but suffered food shortages. Their road to Belcross had become unsafe. She offered deep well cakes, pump designs, and medical support in exchange for salt, iron, and a protected trade route. The mine master wanted proof that a caravan could survive the ravines. Kira volunteered to lead it. Rain objected to the risk. Kira replied that he had trusted her maps when the target was a rabbit and when bandits entered the field. Refusing now, because the road was dangerous, meant he valued her analysis only while he remained close enough to overrule it. Rain asked for her plan. Kira had slept beside road maps, monster hides, weather notes, and travelers' reports for 3 days. She identified a route along dry limestone ridges where boneback boars avoided the sharp footing. The caravan would move at dusk, rest during the hottest hours, and cross the Black Reed Hollow shortly before dawn when glass-horned lizards returned to shade. Her estimated arrival chance was 74% with ordinary wagons. Mira modified the wagons. She lowered their center of gravity, reinforced wheels with iron strips, and built folding side panels that could become barricades. Each axle carried a clay vibration bell that warned of cracking before failure. Water barrels sat above narrow pipes that could spray the ground behind the wagon, creating mud on command. Selena prepared trauma kits and monster venom treatments. Lyra packed dust flower pollen and resin torches whose smoke repelled insects. Evelyn joined because the trade contract required immediate negotiation. Rain joined because logistics coordination remained his responsibility. Mira stayed in Dunridge to maintain the pumps. Selena considered remaining at the clinic, but Brother Caldas had arrived for his inspection and could manage routine cases. Lyra left the seed cooperative under Old Tovin's supervision. The caravan used 6 light wagons and 12 mules. 2 wagons were rented from the army under the earlier supply contract. 2 belonged to the village council, and 2 had been rebuilt from carts confiscated with Havel's stores. A Grey Cap advance paid for the iron reinforcement. 12 sealed water barrels carried 960 liters. Kira's route included a covered quarry cistern on the second day, and a mineral spring maintained by Grey Cap patrols before the final ridge. They also carried 8 days of food for the people and 4 days of compressed mule feed, with replacement feed reserved at the mine. Kira commanded the route. Rain commanded stores and camp operations. Bess led security, with 2 former bandits who had completed their restitution bonds, received their first full wages, and chosen to stay. For the first day, Kira's predictions held. They avoided a brush wolf pack by waiting in a dry quarry. They crossed the limestone ridge before a wheel cracked. Mira's vibration bell rattled, allowing repair before the axle failed. On the second night, a dust storm arrived 6 hours early. Kira had predicted it after dawn. A pressure shift in the western hills accelerated the front. The caravan was exposed on a flat basin with no stone shelter. Rain ordered the wagons into a circle. Side panels unfolded and locked between wheels. Workers dug shallow trenches on the windward side and piled sacks against gaps. Lyra soaked cloth for breathing masks. Selena covered eyes with oiled linen. The storm struck before the final wagon anchored. Wind pushed the empty rear cart sideways, A mule panicked and tore its line. Kira chased it into the dust. Rain followed, despite losing sight of the wagon after 10 steps. He found Kira by the sound of the mule's harness and the flash of her pale scarf. The animal had trapped one leg between stones. Kira cut the strap before it broke the bone. The released load swung toward her. Rain pulled her down as the wooden frame passed above them. They crawled back, following a rope line Bess had tied between wagons. The storm lasted 2 hours. It buried one wheel, ruined 3 bags of mushroom powder, and filled every exposed mechanism with grit. No one died. The lost supplies reduced their margin to 5 days. Kira took responsibility for the missed timing. Rain rejected the idea that probability was a promise. He asked what had changed and how the route should adapt. She studied the pressure, dust direction, and animal behavior. The storm would push monsters east toward the same ridge they planned to use. The safest route was no longer safe. They turned north into the Black Reed Hollow earlier than planned. The hollow held dry stalks taller than a person. Glass horn lizards hunted by detecting movement and body heat. Adults reached the length of a wagon and could puncture wood with translucent horns. Kira ordered cloth wrapped around wheel rims to reduce vibration. The caravan moved slowly in darkness. Resin smoke drifted ahead to mask scent. They reached the center before the first lizard attacked. Its horn pierced the lead wagon panel. The animal twisted, tearing a hole through 2 planks. Bess drove a spear toward its eye, but the horn forced her back. Rain ordered the wagon water pipe opened. A narrow stream wet the dust beneath the lizard's feet. Workers pulled the wagon forward. The animal lunged, slipped, and struck the lowered axle. Kira shouted for everyone to freeze. A second lizard moved through the reeds on the right. A third followed behind. The creatures reacted to vibration. Fighting all 3 would draw more. Lyra lit a resin torch and mixed dust flower pollen into the smoke. Glasshorn lizards lacked human lungs, but their heat-sensing pits were sensitive. The smoke confused their tracking for several seconds. Kira used those seconds to place the caravan. She directed 2 wagons into a narrow V, open toward the first lizard. Bess's team struck the ground on the far side with poles, creating a strong vibration target. The lizard charged between the wagons. Mira's folding panels snapped inward behind it. The animal was not trapped fully. Its tail smashed one hinge and threw a worker into the reeds. Selena reached him under shield cover and found a broken shoulder, not a pierced chest. The second lizard attacked the rear wagon. Its horn entered above the wheel, lifted the panel, and nearly overturned the cart. Rain shifted grain sacks to the opposite side, while workers released water behind the animal. Mud formed beneath its rear feet. Kira climbed onto the wagon roof and watched the lizard's head movements. She called the instant before each thrust. Bess's guards moved aside, letting the horn strike empty wood. On the third thrust, the horn lodged between reinforced beams. Rain ordered the wagon forward. The lizard pulled back. The wet ground denied traction. The beam twisted its head sideways. Bess drove a spear into the soft joint behind its jaw. The animal thrashed for nearly a minute. The wagon frame cracked. One guard suffered a deep tail wound. Selena controlled the bleeding with pressure and a stitched compress. The third lizard circled, but did not commit. Lyra increased the resin smoke. The caravan moved past, while the trapped first lizard broke free and followed the stronger vibration of its injured rival. They did not stop until sunrise. The crossing cost 1 wagon panel, 2 barrels of water, 3 injuries, and most of the resin. It also provided a glass horn, hide plates, and meat Selena judged safe after removing venom glands. Evelyn calculated the salvage value before anyone had finished breathing. The Grey Cap Mines accepted the caravan 2 days later. Minemaster Orla was a square-built woman with iron-gray braids and no patience for speeches. She inspected the ration cakes, pump diagrams, damaged wagons, and glass horn. Evelyn offered a 3-year contract. Greycap would supply rock salt and iron at a price tied to labor cost, rather than Bellcross speculation. The farm cooperative would supply food with a price band, protecting both sides from collapse. Mira's designs would improve mine drainage, but ownership remained with the household, and modifications would be shared. Grey Cap guards would patrol the route to a halfway station. Orla asked what prevented Dunridge from abandoning the mines when grain prices rose. Evelyn placed the public warehouse ledger on the table. She said, reputation had become their most valuable asset. Breaking one contract for temporary profit would reduce every future bargain. Orla signed. The return caravan carried salt, iron, 2 skilled smiths, and a letter inviting Mira to inspect the mine pumps. On the road home, Kira counted long trains of timber, stone, and lime, moving toward Three Teeth Gorge. The drivers said Baron Sorn had begun a flood reservoir there nearly 10 weeks earlier. The work was presented as ordinary drought infrastructure, and guards kept travelers away from the survey stakes. Kira recorded the traffic and the direction of the marked outlet, but she could not yet prove where the water would go. When they reached Dunridge, Mira read the letter 3 times. She had spent years believing the explosion made her unfit for serious work. A mine now requested her expertise because she understood failure better than engineers who could hear alarms. Rain used signs to tell her the choice was hers. Mira signed that she wanted to go after the next pump overhaul. Then she pulled him down by the collar and pressed her forehead to his. Her eyes closed. Her hands rested against his chest, feeling his heartbeat through her palms. The intimacy was quiet and exact, like everything she built. The trade route broke the merchant blockade after 6 escorted caravans completed the crossing over the next 6 weeks. Salt prices fell. Iron returned to the workshops. Deep well cakes reached the mines, road patrols, and 2 neighboring villages. The Bell Cross houses ended their loss-making barley sale and tried to collect on the contracts families had signed. Evelyn organized a debt review. Clauses hidden in small writing violated the provincial limit on famine interest. Some borrowers still owed principal, but they did not owe their future water rights. The village council negotiated a collective settlement backed by warehouse notes. The merchants lost the farms they expected to seize. Baron Sorn lost something larger. Dunridge had become a center of food, water technology, medicine, seed, and trade that did not pass through his stores. He responded through the army. A royal campaign in the eastern borderlands had stalled. Supply lines failed. Soldiers deserted for lack of food. The evening before Sorn's arrival, a clerk announced that a regional requisition would be served at dawn. Evelyn immediately sent Null to Captain Holt's supply post, half a day's ride away, with a request to compare the order against General Rusk's duplicate instructions kept there. Kira estimated that Holt's escort could reach the farm before noon. Rain therefore ordered every store counted and every ownership category read aloud before loading. The delay was lawful and deliberate. Sorn arrived at the farm with an official requisition signed by a regional commander. The army demanded the entire Deep Well Reserve, every ration cake in storage, and exclusive rights to the next harvest. The book opened before Rain could finish reading. Special task: Arsenal of the Provider. Deliver 90% of household food reserves to the Royal Army. Reward: Dawn Edge, Legendary Command Blade. Authority bonus over armed followers. Increased personal combat capability. Projected effects: Dunridge famine probability within 60 days, 71%. Household trust loss, severe. Worker departure, probable. Seed program delay, 1 year. Rain rejected the task. The book asked for confirmation. He rejected it again. The offer disappeared. Baron Sorn watched him as though sensing a decision he could not see. He stated that refusal to supply the crown was treason. Rain did not refuse supply. He refused total seizure. He presented a regional logistics plan, developed from Captain Holt's road reports. The army could receive 35% of current reserve immediately, another portion monthly, and training to produce ration cakes near the front. In return, it would pay partly in coin and partly in grain from districts with better harvests. Dunridge would retain seed and civilian minimums. Sorn dismissed the plan. The commander wanted food now. Evelyn asked whether the commander had seen the requisition's local impact calculation. Kira asked how long the campaign could continue if the army ate the entire reserve in 3 weeks. Soren said strategy was not a farmer's concern. The deliberate inventory had consumed the morning. Captain Holt arrived before soldiers began loading. His road patrol had been promoted into a regional supply escort after the Grey Cap route opened. He carried a separate letter from General Amon Rusk, the commander whose name appeared on the requisition. The general had signed an order for emergency purchase, not confiscation. Soren's clerk had added exclusive rights and removed the payment schedule. The forgery was subtle. The seal was real because Soren possessed delegated authority. Soren claimed clerical error. Evelyn compared ink, handwriting, and margins. The altered page had been prepared in the Baron's office. Captain Holt ordered loading stopped, pending review. Soren's soldiers outnumbered the road patrol. For several minutes, armed men faced one another among root baskets. Rain moved workers and families away from the yard. Mira locked the pump gates. Lyra sealed the seed shed. Selena opened the clinic. Kira identified the officers most likely to obey Soren if violence began. The Baron chose not to fight under uncertain authority. He withdrew, warning that the farm had made an enemy of the only lord capable of protecting it. 3 days later, General Rusk accepted Rain's supply plan. The army purchased food at a reduced but sustainable rate. Dunridge received 2 wagons of northern oats, spare canvas, and an escort schedule for trade caravans. Military bakers trained at the farm. Deep well root began growing near the eastern camps under Lyra's licensing terms. The decision prevented immediate famine. It also exposed Baron Soren's forgery to the provincial court. A weaker lord might have waited for judgment. Soren prepared to control the one resource every court, farm, army, and mine required: water. Mira's surveys showed the limestone aquifer beneath the farm connected to a larger underground basin fed from the northern ridge. The drought had lowered it, but rare storms still recharged the basin through a gorge called Three Teeth. Soren's engineers had been building a dam at the gorge for nearly 4 months under a permit describing it as a flood reservoir. After the forged requisition was exposed, Soren ordered the crews to close the last outlet and raise the central wall. He ordered the project rushed into operation before the provincial court could inspect it. Officially, the dam would store floodwater for the barony. Kira scouted the site and returned with mud on her boots and anger in her eyes. The outlet channel pointed towards Soren's private estate and military granaries. Dunridge, Greycap, and 3 villages downstream would receive less recharge. Worse, the dam wall was too narrow for the pressure of a major storm. If it failed, the flood would strike Dunridge directly. Mira examined Kira's sketches. Her hands shook against the paper. The design was not merely selfish. Rain petitioned for inspection. Soren denied access to the construction site. The provincial court scheduled a hearing 6 weeks away. Kira predicted the first major storm in 10 days. Her confidence was 83%. The farm had less than 10 days to prevent a disaster that might arrive before the law. Rain refused to march on the dam as a private army. He gathered evidence and allies instead. Mira prepared structural drawings from Kira's observations. Greycap miners compared them to known water pressure. The village councils downstream signed a joint emergency petition. Captain Holt sent the documents to General Rusk, arguing that loss of the aquifer would threaten military supply. Evelyn traced the dam's financing. Baron Soren had borrowed from the Bellcross merchant houses and promised them exclusive water sales. The same houses that failed to seize farms through grain debt now intended to sell water back to them. She sent copies of Mira's risk estimate to the 2 largest lenders through the army relay. She invoked the contract clause requiring them to attend an emergency inspection when negligence threatened their security. Their agents joined Captain Holt at the district bridge before the inspection party departed. Lyra calculated crop loss under reduced recharge. Selena estimated deaths if the dam failed during the night. The numbers turned fear into a case. They still needed access to the dam before the storm. General Rusk sent an inspector with 20 soldiers. Soren's guards delayed them at the district bridge, claiming the road had collapsed. Kira found a second route through the old quarry, but it required crossing monster territory. Rain divided responsibilities. Evelyn went with Captain Holt, the 2 lender agents, and representatives from the downstream councils to confront the bridge blockade using the general's authority and the financing records. Selena prepared Dunridge for evacuation and established treatment stations on high ground. Lyra organized workers to reinforce fields with root mats and open old drainage paths. Mira, Kira, Rain, the inspector, and Greycap miners took the quarry route to reach the dam. The sky turned yellow on the second afternoon. Kira shortened the prediction. The storm would arrive before midnight, not in 2 days. A cold front had accelerated behind the hills. The quarry route climbed through broken limestone, where bone-back boars gathered around mineral springs. Kira located a path above the main herd, but Soren's construction wagons had disturbed the animals. Tracks crossed every slope. At sunset, the group found a dead guard with his chest crushed. The boars were already moving. They reached the dam after dark. Three Teeth Gorge narrowed between black rock towers. The new wall stretched across it, built from packed earth, timber cages, and stone facing. Water from earlier showers pooled behind it. The level had risen faster than expected. Mira placed her hands against the lower timbers. Vibration traveled through the wall in uneven pulses. The center had settled. Water was cutting a path along the eastern foundation. The spillway sat too high and too narrow. When the storm arrived, pressure would force water through the weak seam. The dam could not be completed in hours. It could be made safer by opening a controlled breach on the western side and clearing the old natural channel. That would send water across Soren's estate fields before rejoining the downstream river. It would save Dunridge and recharge the aquifer, but destroy part of the Baron's private harvest. Soren arrived with 60 guards before the inspector could issue the order. He accused Rain of sabotage. His engineer insisted the wall was stable and claimed Mira could not assess a structure because she could not hear its strain. Mira watched his mouth, then struck the dam with a hammer. She placed the inspector's hand against the timber. Even he felt the irregular shudder. The engineer blamed normal settling. A jet of muddy water burst through the eastern seam. Workers rushed to plug it with sacks. The flow stopped, then appeared lower on the wall. The inspector ordered the spillway opened and the western relief channel cleared. Soren refused. He said the inspector lacked authority to destroy noble property based on a village woman's guess. Thunder rolled beyond the ridge. Kira said the first heavy rain would reach them in less than an hour. Soren ordered his guards to arrest Rain and the others. Captain Holt's horn sounded from the bridge road. She arrived with the general's soldiers, the representatives from 3 village councils, and the 2 Bellcross lender agents summoned under the financing clause. During the blocked march, they had compared Soren's safety declarations with Mira's drawings, and confirmed that he had misrepresented the spillway and foundation in their contracts. The Baron still held more men. Many were local soldiers whose families lived downstream. Evelyn read the financing clause aloud. Soren personally guaranteed repayment if negligence made the dam unusable. The lenders would seize his estate if the structure failed. Soren ordered his guards to take the documents. Captain Holt stepped between them. He stated that General Rusk's inspector held emergency authority over infrastructure, threatening military supply. The first violence came from the gorge, not the men. A bone-back boar crashed through the construction camp, driven by thunder and rising water. It stood higher than a mule, with stone-hard plates along its spine. 2 smaller boars followed. Workers scattered. One guard fired an arrow that struck a plate and enraged the animal. The great boar charged the dam crest. Kira shouted its path before it moved. Rain pulled the inspector aside. The boar struck a timber cart, overturned it, and sent logs rolling toward the spillway crew. Mira signaled the miners. They drove wedges under the largest log and redirected its fall. The log struck the spillway gate, bending the lifting frame. Now, the gate could not open fully. Rain saw the problem divide into 3 battles. They had to control the animals, hold Soren's guards, and relieve the dam before the storm filled the basin. He assigned authority quickly. Kira took the hunters and road patrol against the boars. Mira took miners and builders to create the western breach. Evelyn and Captain Holt held the legal confrontation and soldiers. Rain coordinated workers and water flow. Lyra and Selena were miles away, but their preparations mattered. Root fiber ropes reinforced the work lines. Selena's marked medical kits hung at every station. The system displayed family synergy across distance because the goal had been agreed before separation. Kira did not attack the great boar head-on. She observed the injured foreleg and the way it turned away from lightning. She placed torch teams along the eastern rock and ordered them to strike metal when she signaled. The sound and flashes pushed the smaller boars toward an empty supply yard. The great boar resisted. It charged a torch team and crushed one man's shield. Kira fired at the soft skin beneath its jaw, not to kill, but to turn its head. The arrow lodged shallowly. The animal followed her along the dam crest. Rain opened a construction water trough behind it. Mud spread across the packed earth. The boar's injured leg slipped. It struck the stone facing and rolled into a side trench. Hunters dropped a timber cage gate behind it. The animal smashed 2 bars and nearly escaped. Kira directed ropes around the cage and anchored them to loaded wagons. The boar remained contained long enough for the smaller animals to flee up the gorge. At the western wall, Mira marked a breach shape with white chalk. Too narrow, and pressure would widen it uncontrollably. Too low, and the first surge would tear the foundation. She chose a stepped cut beginning near the upper third. Soren's engineers shouted that she was destroying months of work. Mira handed him the hammer and invited him to feel the wall. He refused. The gray cap miners began cutting. Soren sent guards toward them. Captain Holt ordered his soldiers to block the path. Blades came free. For several breaths, the gorge held 2 armed lines while thunder moved closer. Evelyn walked between them, carrying the lender's contract and General Rust's order above her head. She told Soren's men that any soldier preventing emergency relief would be recorded by name as responsible for downstream deaths. Any soldier who assisted would be protected under military authority. Wages owed by the Baron could be claimed from the seized financing account. The mention of unpaid wages mattered. Soren had delayed pay for 2 months to fund construction. One sergeant lowered his spear. Then another. Half the Baron's line stepped aside. Soren struck the first sergeant across the face with the flat of his sword. The man did not raise his weapon again, but the other soldiers closed around the Baron and took the sword from his hand. The political fight ended before it became a massacre. The water fight worsened. Rain began falling in heavy drops. Within minutes, sheets of water ran down the gorge walls. The pool behind the dam climbed toward the damaged spillway. Mira's crew completed the first step of the breach. Water cut through with a roar and threw 2 miners off their feet. Safety ropes caught them. The opening began eroding faster than planned on the lower edge. Mira signaled for rock cages. Workers rolled timber cribs filled with stone into the cut. The first cage lodged. The second spun sideways and blocked too much flow. Water backed up again. Rain led a team onto the slick wall to attach a pull line. A wave struck his knees. The rope burned through his palms. Another worker slipped and vanished over the downstream edge. The man's safety line snapped tight. He swung against the stone face, conscious but unable to climb. Rain could not stop the breach work for one rescue. He assigned 2 climbers and continued hauling the cage. The line moved a handspan at a time. Mira watched the water pattern and changed the angle with signals. When the cage rotated free, the breach flow spread across 3 steps instead of one violent cut. The western channel had not been cleared fully. Felled trees and construction waste blocked its lower bend. Kira returned from the boar cage and took a team downstream. They worked in waist-deep water, cutting branches while the first controlled surge arrived. One tree shifted and trapped Bess against a rock. Kira climbed onto the trunk, found the pivot, and ordered everyone to stop pulling. She cut 2 smaller branches, reducing drag, then used a wagon line to roll the trunk instead of lifting it. Bess came free with a crushed boot and torn leg. The channel opened. Water rushed across Baron Soren's estate fields. It flattened unharvested barley, filled old ponds, and continued toward the natural riverbed. The aquifer recharge sink at the lower gorge received the flow. The central dam wall still stood. At the height of the storm, water reached the repaired spillway and poured through both outlets. The eastern seam widened, but did not collapse. Mira remained with one hand on the timber for nearly an hour, signaling adjustments whenever vibration changed. Dawn revealed the damage. Soren's private fields were ruined. 2 construction sheds had washed away. 1 worker and 3 soldiers suffered serious injuries. No one died at the dam. Downstream, Dunridge's drainage channels filled but held. Lyra's root mats prevented the southern field from eroding. Selena's evacuation camps treated cuts, fever, and 1 broken arm. The underground basin rose for the first time in 3 years. General Rusk's inspector arrested Baron Sorn for falsifying requisition orders, obstructing emergency authority, and endangering military supply. The merchant lenders seized his financing records. The provincial court suspended his governing powers pending trial. Rain did not celebrate the destroyed estate. Food had been lost during famine. He sent crews to salvage wet barley before it spoiled, and allocated part to the families of Sorn's soldiers. Evelyn called the gesture strategically wise. Rain said it was also food. She looked at him with an expression he could not price. The storm ended the worst phase of the drought. It did not restore the old rivers, but the aquifer recovered enough for measured expansion. Free Teeth became a public water reserve managed by representatives from Dunridge, Greycap, downstream villages, the army, and the provincial court. Mira redesigned the dam with a lower spillway, stone core, and multiple relief channels. The Crowned Furrow Guild joined the Regional Seed Standards Council after Lyra forced it to accept open inspections and farmer representation. The Bell Cross Temple opened a sanitation school under Selena's charter. The merchant houses returned under stricter contracts because trade remained more profitable than revenge. Rain's father was cleared of the charge that had stripped his title. Records from Havel's store and Sorn's office proved he had opposed illegal levies accurately. The provincial court offered Rain restoration as a minor lord. The related cases also reached judgment. Havel was convicted of falsifying debt notes, stealing levy grain, and conspiring to commit arson. His seized property was applied to village restitution, and he was barred permanently from public office. Sorn was removed as baron after conviction for falsified requisitions, unlawful water monopoly, and reckless endangerment. His estate entered court receivership to pay soldiers, lenders, and downstream damages. Evelyn's emergency tax petition was joined to the requisition case. The court voided the levy above the royal 1/3 limit and credited the excess already delivered against future crown taxes. Rain accepted the legal protection of the restored title and refused personal control over Dunridge. The provincial court approved a perpetual cooperative trust. Legal title to the Alder land remained with the 6 equal household owners. Productive buildings, workshops, and shared infrastructure were operated by the cooperative under public accounts. Rain's restored title carried representation duties to the crown, but it gave him no power to dismiss the elected village council or alter the household charter alone. Amendments affecting ownership required unanimous consent. The Alder freehold became Havenstead Cooperative Estate. Rain held 1 vote inside the household and 1 seat on the water council. No more. The old debt was recalculated. Havel's false interest disappeared. Compensation for stolen grain reduced the principal. Evelyn paid the remainder using caravan profit, then made Rain sign a receipt acknowledging that the debt had been paid by the household, not by him alone. The book opened on the evening they burned the final debt note. Major objective complete. Stable, prosperous household established. Food security high. Water security moderate and improving. Average trust 87%. Shared ownership integrity maintained. New long-term objective available. 5 branches of the house. Raise 1 child with each spouse and provide all children with safe shelter, adequate nutrition, education, and recognized inheritance. Conditions. Every parent must give free and continuing consent. No pregnancy may be treated as compulsory labor. No child may reduce a spouse's ownership or authority. Failure to begin carries no penalty. Coercion will permanently close the book. Rain read the task twice. He closed the display and said nothing for 3 days. Kira noticed first. She had a 91% estimate that the system had presented a difficult family objective. Mira noticed his pulse changed whenever children played near the workshop. Selena asked whether he was ill. Lyra accused him of hiding a resource problem. Evelyn opened the household accounts and proved no money was missing. They called a meeting and required him to explain. Rain described the objective exactly. He emphasized the absence of a deadline and penalty. He said the book could keep its reward. No one would become a mother to satisfy a system. Silence held the table. Then Evelyn asked what the reward was. Rain admitted he had closed the page before checking. She told him that refusing to inspect terms before negotiation remained a terrible economic habit. The others laughed, and some of the pressure left the room. Rain opened the book while the others sat around the table and read every condition and the reward aloud. Mira copied the terms onto the meeting slate, so all 6 could examine the same wording. The reward was not power. It was a permanent household archive capable of preserving medical records, seed lines, engineering designs, maps, contracts, and family history against fire or theft. Lyra wanted the archive. Selena wanted the archive, but threatened to throw Rain into the cistern if he interpreted that as agreement to pregnancy. Mira signed that she had once assumed no one would choose a deaf mother. She needed time to decide what she wanted, rather than react to old shame. Kira said she had dreamed of a child following tracks beside her. But dreams did not make a schedule. Evelyn asked practical questions about inheritance, nursing time, medical risk, work replacement, and whether 5 children, born too close together, would overwhelm the household. The conversation became a planning session because that was how their family handled fear. Selena established health conditions and spacing. Evelyn created personal childcare funds belonging to each mother. Rain proposed that every parent, including him, receive protected time away from work. Lyra required the seed cooperative to train another senior breeder so pregnancy would not make her program dependent on one body. Mira designed safer living quarters and hand signal alarms for infants. Kira mapped school routes and evacuation plans before any child existed. No one made a promise that night. Romance continued at the pace each woman chose. Rain and Lyra argued over fields, then walked them together at dusk. Selena kissed him when she wanted, and sent him away when the clinic exhausted her. Mira taught him a full signed language, correcting his clumsy grammar by tapping his knuckles. After Rain finally signed a full sentence without an error, Mira kissed the fingertips that formed his name and drew him close, until their foreheads touched. Kira often slept beside him, because his breathing helped her enter analysis rest, though she warned him not to mistake proximity for permission. Months later, after returning from a winter patrol, she placed his hand over the route map and told him she had analyzed every future she could imagine. In the ones she wanted, she came home to him. She kissed him once, watched his face as carefully as any trail, and kissed him again after he asked. Evelyn remained the hardest to read. She controlled Havenstead's finances, negotiated with lords, and could detect a dishonest clause before the ink dried. She distrusted affection, because affection had been used to make her sign away her inheritance after her father's business failed. The household charter already separated personal gifts from common assets, and the 6 owners later approved a unanimous amendment for independent ventures. Common debts and reserves were funded first. Each owner's 1/6 distribution was then recorded, and any member could keep that distribution in a personal account or invest it separately. Evelyn used part of her recorded share to establish an independent trading house owned mostly by its workers. Rain supported the decision and never asked her to conceal common profit inside it. The choice unsettled her more than a declaration would have. One winter evening, she found him in the accounts room, repairing a child's wooden counting frame. Pella, now healthy, used it at the new school. Evelyn asked why he repaired cheap objects instead of buying another. Rain said the frame held marks from the first class. Pella valued it. Evelyn sat across from him and said she had spent years believing value existed only where people agreed to pay. Havenstead had taught her that price measured urgency, power, fear, and desire, but often missed the labor required to make something matter. She took the counting frame from his hands, set it aside, and kissed him with careful confidence. Afterward, she informed him that this did not grant access to her trading ledgers. Rain said he valued his life too much to ask. Kira, who had been asleep beneath the window, raised one thumb without opening her eyes. Jealousy never vanished completely. Lyra disliked when Selena occupied Rain's rare free evenings during planting season. Selena objected when Kira returned from long patrols and claimed his bed for sleep before speaking to anyone. Evelyn occasionally scheduled Rain for caravan meetings on days Mira wanted help at the workshop. Mira expressed irritation by moving his boots to increasingly inconvenient locations. They argued. They used the household rules. They made time. No rivalry threatened ownership, food, or safety. Affection became another resource that required honest accounting, though no board could measure it perfectly. 11 years after the debt wedding, travelers reached Dunridge by following water towers. Mira's pumps stood along the road at measured intervals. Wind vanes powered some. Foot levers powered others. Each station included a settling tank, covered trough, and maintenance box. Symbols showed travelers how much water they could take and whom to contact if the mechanism failed. The village itself had changed shape. Stone-lined drains ran beneath the main street. Public washhouses reduced disease. Deep well fields alternated with beans, hardy grain, and grazing strips that restored soil. The old grain hall became a school and council chamber. Selena's clinic occupied a clean brick building with wide windows, a sterilizing room, and beds spaced far enough to reduce infection. Lyra's seed cooperative tested crops from 6 districts. Her drought lines spread across the border provinces, but each region kept breeding rights. The Crown Furrow Guild still argued over standards. It now argued at open meetings where farmers could read the data. Mira divided her time between Havenstead and Greycap. She trained engineers to use visual alarms and vibration checks. Mines across the region adopted her supports and pump valves. Accident deaths fell enough that even conservative owners copied the methods. Kira commanded the Havenstead Rangers, a mixed group of hunters, scouts, and road wardens. They tracked monsters, mapped storms, escorted caravans, and protected breeding grounds from overhunting. Her reports always included confidence levels. People learned that uncertainty described honestly was more useful than certainty performed for authority. Evelyn's trading house operated from the renovated Alder cellar. Workers owned shares. Contracts tied prices to labor and risk bands rather than allowing one desperate season to transfer entire farms. She still pursued profit with sharp delight. Profit funded reserves, expansion, and independence when earned without trapping the weak. Rain coordinated the systems connecting them. He no longer recorded every cup of water. Local teams managed daily operations. He focused on regional reserves, emergency routes, and training people who could replace him. The book rewarded succession more than control. The 5 children arrived across 4 years, after separate decisions and careful spacing. Lyra's daughter Nara was first. She had copper hair and an alarming habit of pulling seedlings from the ground to inspect their roots. Lyra returned to the breeding fields gradually, while Rain, Selena, and hired caregivers shared night feeding and household work. Mira's son Tavi came next. He responded to vibration before sound and learned signs alongside speech. Mira built a cradle that rocked through a foot pedal and flashed a soft lamp when he cried at night. Rain became skilled at reading the lamp through half-closed eyes. Selena's daughter Ellen was born during a difficult labor. Selena had prepared every instrument and contingency, then discovered that medical knowledge did not make fear disappear when she became the patient. Brother Caldus assisted under her direction. She recovered slowly and refused to hide the weakness from her students. The clinic used her case to improve maternal care across the district. Kira's son, Rowan, slept poorly, an irony the entire household appreciated. Kira could predict a boar migration from broken grass, but could not predict when her baby would wake. She began carrying him on map walks. By 3, he could identify rabbit tracks and the safest place to nap in any room. Evelyn waited longest. She expanded the trading house, reviewed the inheritance charter, and observed how Rain behaved when exhausted children damaged plans. Her daughter Mara arrived after Evelyn stated that the choice felt like hers rather than the book's. She kept control of her company throughout pregnancy and returned on her own schedule. The household did not assign each child to one mother and one father in practice. All 6 adults cared for all 5 children, while each mother retained authority over her health and personal decisions. The inheritance charter created equal trusts for the children from future household distributions. The trusts vested at adulthood and did not reduce any mother's existing 1/6 ownership. Marriage could not transfer a child's trust to an outside household. The book completed its long-term objective on a spring morning, when the youngest child ate breakfast at the same table where the first spoiled grain had once been sorted. 5 branches of the house complete. Conditions verified. Safety, adequate. Nutrition, adequate. Education, active. Inheritance, recognized. Continuing consent, verified. Permanent household archive, unlocked. A new room appeared in the old cellar, though no wall moved. Through the book, authorized family members could store copies of records. Seed histories, pump designs, medical protocols, maps, contracts, and personal letters entered the archive. The originals remained in the real world, where people used them. Rain refused to make the archive secret family property. The household voted to preserve public copies of any knowledge developed with public labor. Private letters and medical details remained protected. The system accepted the distinction. Havenstead's greatest test after the drought came not from a lord, but from abundance. A sequence of good seasons filled granaries. Grain prices fell. Farmers planted more deep well root than markets needed. Some workers demanded wages based on famine-era profits. Traders borrowed heavily to expand. The old danger of hunger changed into the danger of collapse through overproduction. Rain called a regional council. They reduced planting quotas voluntarily, expanded animal feed and starch uses, and established a reserve purchase floor. Evelyn warned against supporting prices so high that inefficient production continued forever. Lyra shifted part of the seed program toward flavor and soil restoration, rather than pure survival yield. Mira built small starch mills. Selena developed fortified food for clinics and pregnant women. Kira opened safer routes to cities where demand remained high. The adjustment hurt. 2 speculative traders failed. Several fields changed crops. Havenstead used reserves to keep families fed during transition, but did not erase every bad investment. The community learned that prosperity also required limits. Rain kept the original survival board above his office door. Water output, food reserve, safe labor hours, tool condition, coin reserve, commitments owed. Children added drawings around it. Nara drew purple roots with faces. Tavi added a pump with impossible gears. Ellen drew 6 adults holding bowls. Rowan added a monster too large for the page. Mara wrote prices beside everyone and charged visitors 1 pebble to view the art. One evening, a caravan arrived from the Eastern Front, carrying refugees from a new flood. The disaster had destroyed 2 towns and stranded hundreds along the river road. Rain read the report once. He did not take command alone. Lyra checked seed and food reserves. Mira selected portable pumps and bridge parts. Selena prepared medical teams. Kira mapped the flooded approaches. Evelyn opened emergency credit and transport contracts that prevented merchants from raising prices during evacuation. The children carried blankets to the wagons. Rain stood in the yard, where the villagers had once delivered 5 unwanted women and 7 days of food. The old hut remained inside the larger estate, repaired but not replaced. Its first room served as a training kitchen. New workers learned inventory there before touching the main stores. Mira handed Rain the departure checklist. Lyra corrected the seed count. Selena added extra clean cloth. Kira changed the route after a 10-minute sleep. Evelyn removed a clause that would have charged refugees for wagon damage. They argued over weight, departure time, and whether Rain had packed enough medicine for his own stomach. Then, the convoy moved. Havenstead did not send legendary weapons to the flooded towns. It sent pumps, dried food, engineers, healers, route maps, accountants, clean water equipment, and people trained to use them. Years earlier, Rain had died in a shelter because help was 6 hours away, and the plan depended on one exhausted specialist. This time, the plan traveled in many hands. The convoy returned after 31 days. It brought fewer supplies than it carried out. There were 12 injured workers, 74 refugees, 3 orphaned children traveling with relatives, and a pair of mill engineers who wanted to study Mira's pumps. No one from Havenstead had died. Rain entered the old hut after sunset and found dinner waiting. Deep well stew simmered beside fresh bread. The meal would have looked impossible on the first night of the household. The 5 women arrived in stages. Lyra came from the seed sheds with soil on her sleeves. Mira carried a cracked valve from the convoy pump. Selena had just finished examining the injured. Kira slept in a chair before removing her boots. Evelyn brought the expedition accounts and placed them beside Rain's bowl, despite everyone's objections. The children filled the room with reports that competed for attention. Nera had crossed 2 new route lines. Tavi had repaired a lantern. Ellen had learned to tie a bandage. Rowan had discovered tracks near the western pond and insisted they belonged to a dragon, though Kira identified a large goose. Mara had charged the mill engineers for a tour and was required to return half the fee because the workshop was not hers to sell. Rain listened while eating. The book opened once, showing stores, health, trust, repairs, and the probability of surviving the next week. 99%. Rain dismissed the display. A pump seal still needed replacement. Refugees needed housing before the cold season. The western pond required a fence. One trade note had been written against grain that did not exist. Selena expected a difficult birth at the clinic before dawn. Lyra suspected a new pest in the southern beds. Kira wanted the goose relocated before Rowan attempted to hunt it. Evelyn had already calculated the cost. Life at Havenstead remained full of problems. They were the kind people solved after dinner.